Hey everybody! How's it going? Hey! What's up? So yeah, we're just gonna, kind of vibe for a little bit here. I hope everyone's doing very, 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 very well. It's been a weird Friday so far. My sleep schedule's been kind of all over the place, excuse me. But yeah, it's been interesting, to say the least. But we're in for some treats today. I found several good long stories to read for tonight. So I hope everyone's thrilled, because I am. Oh, you missed it, River. So I've been doing this kind of thing where I would play old videos from my channel while also reading new stuff live. And your story that you were featured in my channel, The World's Best School Psychologist, was one of the first ones that got played. So everyone got to hear your voice. Yes, for those of you who don't know, my friend River Vite, he is a great, great guy. Awesome voice actor. Yeah. And he's just really, really awesome to work with. So yeah, he's in the chat. So for anyone who wants to, fangirl, fanboy, by all means, bombard him. Aw, thanks. Yeah, I've got some really good stuff lined up here. I'm excited. They're all pretty lengthy too. I may not actually hop back and forth between my own videos, unless it's just to give my throat a break, which, that may be thing. Hey, Phyllis Destructicus. I wouldn't call this my new avatar. This is more along the lines of my stand-in model until my official model gets made. But yeah, this is one that I made. So for the time being, it's just gonna have to do. Okay. Yeah. Alright. We're going to get things started here momentarily. You guys know the drill. Once the bonfire is up, make sure you turn your headphones up. Have the lights a little low if you can. Grab some snacks, curl up by the fire, and enjoy the stories. Oh, dude, Honey Jack is the shit, let me tell you. Hey! Alright. I hope everybody's ready. Let's see here. Getting my stuff together. Alright. It's time for the bonfire. Yoink. Alright, everyone. The first story on the list for today is Mirrored. Feel free to read with me as I read aloud. You know that horror movie trope about mirrors? The one where the protagonist is near a mirror and they look or shift away from the mirror for just a moment. And when they look back, a ghost, killer, or some other entity appears and then usually rapidly disappears when they turn around. I've always disliked looking into mirrors, and for a while I convinced myself that it was caused by an overactive imagination combined with seeing this situation one too many times in a movie. But as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that it's much more than that. I don't dislike looking into mirrors, I'm afraid of it. Something has always just felt off about it. I recognize the image in my reflection as me, but it has never felt familiar. I brought it up to a friend once, and she Googled at me for a moment and then laughed, though I could hear a tinge of fear behind it. What do you mean you don't recognize your reflection? How is that even possible? It's the same reflection that you've been staring at your whole life. And she was right, of course, but that was part of the problem. My reflection has never felt normal to me. Not in the way that it should. Not in the way that it does to other people. I've observed the reflections of friends and family members when they're standing near mirrors. It doesn't feel the same. It feels connected to them and a simple mirror image. Even with their eyes meet mine in the mirror, I don't feel the oppressive feeling of other that I get when I meet my own eyes in my reflection. With no explanation that seemed to fit my experiences, I chalked it up to just being a weird quirk and decided to just get on with my life. When I moved into my first apartment by myself, I removed all of the mirrors except for one that I kept in my guest bedroom. It stayed covered with a sheet unless I absolutely needed to use it. You'd be surprised how well you can get by without mirrors when you've been doing it your whole life. I even got pretty good at applying makeup without seeing what I was doing. Every once in a while, I'd catch my reflection in a mirror in a public bathroom, or if I looked wrong into my rearview mirror, and it would set my heart racing. I always felt menaced when it happened, and it would take me a few moments to calm down again. But all in all, I was doing fairly well with my mirror avoidance strategies. However, that all changed one day at work. I work in the artifact restoration department at my city's history museum. It's typically fascinating, delicate, and detailed work, and I love it. I mostly work with pottery or statues and carvings, but I always knew that one day someone would bring me an antique mirror to restore, and I would have no choice but to do it. I had been at the museum for 5 years, and it still hadn't happened. I had almost convinced myself that I was in the clear. Alas, that was not the case. It was late on a Friday when it was first brought to me. The museum director had it wheeled in under a sheet, but I immediately knew what it was. I could tell from the dread that practically exploded inside me. He beamed at me as he whipped the sheet off. "Isn't it magnificent?" he crowed. "Early 1700s French." He smiled at me, waiting for my exclamations over its beauty, I'm sure. My breath felt like it was caught in my throat as I stared down my full reflection for the first time in what had been years. It looked back at me, also with a petrified expression, but it felt different, like my reflection's face was an act. A mimicking of my face, not an exact copy. I stood transfixed for a minute, trapped under my own gaze. Suddenly, the director stepped into my line of view, blocking the mirror from my sight. "Well, what do you think? Gorgeous, isn't it? Doesn't look like it needs too much work. A little spit shine, maybe," he said with a grin, winking at me. "Yes, gorgeous," I mumbled. He must have noticed how white I had gone because he recovered the mirror and put his hand on my shoulder. "Don't stress about it. I know you'll do a great job. And don't worry about starting today. You can get cracking on Monday." With that, he turned and left the room, leaving me alone with the mirror. I put my head in my hands and rubbed my temples with my thumbs. "Okay, you can do this," I whispered to myself. "You have the whole weekend to prepare." I looked up at the clock, 5:15. I grabbed my things and headed for the door. I'd deal with the mirror on Monday. Shh. I had almost made it all the way out of the building when I realized I'd left my keys on my work table. Shit, I moaned. But there was nothing to be done for it. I needed the keys to lock up the building. Before I opened the door back to my workspace, I took a deep breath. It's just a stupid mirror, I said to myself. I stepped into the room. Everything looked normal. I stepped quickly past the mirror to my desk, bent open the drawer where I kept my keys, and when I turned around, the sheet that had been covering the mirror moments before was in a pile on the floor in front of it. My knees went weak, and I had to grab onto my desk to keep them from buckling. It just fell. That's all, I whispered out loud. When I walked by it quickly, it made a breeze that knocked it off. I felt deep down that was not what had happened at all. But saying it out loud gave me enough courage to approach the mirror to replace the sheet. Once I was in front of it, I knelt down to grab the sheet, never once taking my eyes off my reflection. As I straightened back up, I turned to face the mirror head on. With one hand, I reached out and lightly pressed my fingertips against my reflections. My fingers stopped at the cold, hard glass. It was cold enough that the warmth from my fingers fogged up a little area around each tip. My reflection had the tiniest of smiles playing around her lips. I didn't feel myself smiling, but it was such a small one, perhaps I didn't notice myself doing it. I rearranged my face into grotesque poses just to make sure my reflection did it too. She did, but it brought me little comfort. I took a step forward until my face was practically touching the mirror. I could see every pore, every freckle. It looked familiar, but it felt alien. I breathed onto it, fogging the surface in front of my face. I slowly traced a heart into the fog. I saw my reflection do the same, but then I noticed something odd. I couldn't see the heart I drew in the reflection. My heart began to thump wildly in my chest. I hastily used my sleeve to wipe away the remnants of my breath. The fog in the reflection, however, remained. I sucked in a sharp breath of air and took a staggering step back. I pressed my palms into my eyelids until I saw stars. I slowly counted to 10 and opened my eyes. All I could see was my reflection staring worriedly back at me. She looked pale and faint, exactly how I felt, but it still didn't look or feel quite right. I threw the sheet back over the mirror and ran out of the building. By the time I arrived home, I had calmed down significantly. Enough that I was suddenly able to remember that I had a date that night. I groaned out loud. I didn't really want to go, but I actually did like this guy. We had already been going on a few dates and hit it off well, so I pulled myself together the best I could. By the time Nick arrived to pick me up, I had shaken off the vestiges of my earlier terror. While at dinner, he asked me how my day had been. I hesitated, not wanting to tell him about what had happened or about my irrational and odd reactions to mirrors. But I suddenly realized that I had a desperate desire to tell someone about what had happened, even if it made me sound crazy. I relayed the story to him, never once looking into his eyes. I didn't want to see what I knew would be reflected there. Fear, anxiety, disgust. But when I finished and did look up, he was simply studying me. After a moment, he reached out and took my hand. "You know what I read once?" he asked. I shook my head slightly. It was one of those micro-blog social media sites. It said, "What if the only reason we can't walk through mirrors is because our reflection blocks us? What if they know that the other side is horrifying and painful and they're trying to keep us from ever crossing over?" He shrugged. "Just a weird thing I read, but it sounds like yours isn't trying to protect you. It's trying to get out of there," he said with a laugh. "Wouldn't that be something? That would explain why you feel like you do." I sat in stunned silence. My throat was as dry as the desert. I had to forcefully swallow several times before I could speak again. Yeah, that would be something. My mind was racing with what he had said as we left the restaurant. His little theory perfectly described how I felt, but I didn't know what to do with that information. It was nonsense after all. I wanted only to go home at that point, but Nick grabbed my hand. "I actually have something in mind for us to do tonight, but it's a surprise." I sighed internally, but smiled at him. "Sure, lead the way." We caught a cab and got out in front of what looked like an old abandoned warehouse. I might have thought that's what it was too, if it wasn't for the line of people out the door. "What's this?" I asked. "It's an adventure space," he said with a huge smile. "Kind of like a playhouse for grown-ups. I've seen it advertised all over the place. There's supposed to be things to explore and climb on, stuff like that." I couldn't help but smile at his infectious excitement. "Okay, let's check it out," I said with a giggle. The first few rooms were indeed a lot of climbing and twisting and bending and crawling. We kept losing each other and then finding each other by the sound of our laughter. I was surprised at how much fun I was having. He grabbed my hand, and as we moved towards the last room, "I think you'll like this one the best," he said, pulling me forward. I was about to ask why, but the word died on my lips as we walked through the doorway. It was a room full of mirrors. A much larger and more terrifying version of a funhouse made for children. He shoved me further into the room so that the door behind us slammed shut. "To help you get over your fear," he said with another shove. Never before had I felt the level of fear that rose in my chest than at that moment. It was all-consuming. It wiped nearly every other thought from my mind. I was facing down hundreds of my own reflection, and they looked horrifying. I turned to Nick to beg him to help me out of there, but he had disappeared. "Nick?" I croaked, my voice crackling with terror. "Nick!" I screamed. I heard him laughing as he shouted, "This way!" I stumbled forward, hands outstretched, unable to tell which way was correct. Tears began pouring out of my eyes as I struggled to breathe under the weight of my panic. Every direction I looked was a reflection of myself, each one looking more ominous than the last. I turned a corner and saw hundreds of reflections at the back of my head, all lined up in a row. I was paralyzed with fear. I closed my eyes and took a few shuddering, deep breaths. "Nick?" I called out again. This time, I got no answer. I knew to get out, I was going to have to open my eyes. There was no way I was making it out of there blind. I opened my eyes and was greeted with the same sight I had seen when I had closed them. I exhaled loudly. A tiny wave of relief hit me. I heard a noise to my right and turned my head that way. "Nick?" I asked again. When I looked forward again, all of my reflections were facing away from me, all except the one in front. She was facing me with a horrible grin plastered onto her face. She beckoned for me, and as if in a trance, I could only shake my head. When I didn't move forward, her grin turned into a snarl, and she began slamming her fists against the glass. I let out a blood-curdling scream as I saw my vision go spotty. I stepped back in such a panic that I smashed into the mirror behind me. I felt a sharp pain in the back of my head as a shower of glass rained down around me. I'm certain I passed out for a moment, both from pain and fear. When I came to, I could feel something warm and sticky dripping down my back. I reached up my hand, and it came away bloody. "Fuck," I moaned. I could faintly hear Nick yelling for me. I dragged myself up into a sitting position, wincing as my hands and legs got further cut up from the glass. Across the room, I could see Nick, and hundreds of Nick's reflections kneeling down in front of me. I closed and rubbed my eyes, shaking my head in the process. How could Nick be with my reflection when he wasn't here with me? I must have hit my head harder than I thought to myself. I could hear him talking, but it sounded muted and far away. I heard the word help, but not much more. He stood up and sprinted for the door. I couldn't tell if he was coming back or not, and as if it seemed like I could get up and walk, I decided to try. I was still anxious to get out of this hall of horrors. I finally made it to the exit door. It had become extremely foggy and unseasonably cold while we were inside. The air had a terrible metallic tang to it that filled my nose and mouth. I shivered in the wind that whipped brutally around me. As I glanced around, I realized that I didn't see anyone else nearby. No people, no cars, nothing. Grimacing, I whipped out my phone to call for an ambulance myself, but the battery was dead. "Come on!" I yelled in frustration. I slowly started hobbling towards the road. I figured I could at least catch a cab, but there was no one on the road either. I began to cry again. What a nightmare this turned out to be. I staggered home, alone and freezing. When I got back inside, I plugged my phone in. I needed to let someone know that I was hurt where I ended up. When the phone powered on, a barrage of texts came in, mostly from Nick, but they were all jumbled up. A random mixture of letters, numbers, and symbols. I couldn't make heads or tails of any of it. I tried to send a text back, but it refused to send. I couldn't even get a signal to make a call. Panic, bitter like bile, threatened to rise up again, but I fought it off. I would deal with the shoddy cell service later. For now, I needed to take care of myself. Once I started to clean myself up, I quickly realized that most of my cuts were shallow or superficial. I was able to get the glass out and get everything cleaned up on my own. Well, every piece except one. I could feel one near the top of my head that I couldn't just get a grip on. I closed my eyes and let out a deep breath. I was going to need to use the mirror. I hobbled into the guest room and slowly pulled away the sheet. Before, there had been nothing more frightening than seeing my reflection in the mirror. But that night, I realized there was one thing more terrifying than seeing my reflection in the mirror. Not seeing any at all. Man, I don't know about you guys, but fuck Nick for dragging the main character into a hall of mirrors. Like, no, you don't do that shit, okay? Like, you finally get the nerve to tell somebody, hey, I have a problem, and then the first thing they do is drag you into a fucking hall of mirrors. That's fucking insane, dude. I would never, ever would I do that. That's crazy. That's insanity. Okay. All right, you guys have a choice. We can either have a story that I read in the past play, give me a little break, or we can jump into another story live. It's up to you guys. I am down for whatever. I have water, so we're good to go. Hydrate! Okay. Dude was in on it. Damn, Jinx. Thank you. Hydrate before I dehydrate. Okay. In that case, we will take, I say we're going to take a small break. Where I'm going to find a video that I can play that you guys can listen to. It's going to be a short one, though. Where is it? There's a good short one too. Hold on. Aha! Oh, yeah. Back against the wall. I did write that one. That was written by me. All right, we'll do this one. This one's like 5 minutes. All right, here we go. We're gonna skip this real quick.
Have you ever had one of those feelings that something was wrong? I don't mean during the day either, but at night. I mean that sudden, unprovoked feeling of dread that commands you to wake. Funny, it's almost like nocturnal evil gives something off that your sleeping brain picks up on. I had one of those recently. It forced me up at 3 a.m. Normally, when you have that feeling, you'd lay still, feigning sleep, or if you're feeling adventurous, you'd take a quick check around the house. After you failed to discover anything, you'd inevitably crawl back to sleep. I should have done that this time. I should have stayed asleep. That night, I sat straight up. For the longest time, I sat there staring into the dark of my house before I even realized that I was awake. Then came the fear, that slow, strangling feeling that constricts your chest and worms its way down your throat. I was alone in my home, wide-eyed and afraid with no explanation. I couldn't hear the telltale signs of a break-in downstairs or the phantom sounds of a leaking pipe. I had no reason to be freaked out, but I was. Without much thought, I just got up and walked over to the window. I don't know why I did. I peeled back just enough of the curtain to poke my head through, and I stared out into the moonlit backyard. I should have stayed asleep. Outside, prancing around my garden, was a clown. It had ruffles around its sleeves and collar, baggy pants, and floppy shoes. Its painted white face was even topped off with a big red rubber nose. It was without a doubt the last thing I wanted to see at 3 a.m. It danced in complete silence, doing a step that only a madman or a child could understand. Its playful manner was haunting. I watched with dread fascination as it circled the garden, trying my best to ignore the growing lump in my throat. It moved around, pausing occasionally to play with my gardening tools or sniff the budding plants. Then it waltzed over to an oak sapling I had planted and disappeared. I blinked. This wasn't possible. It walked behind the thin infant plant but didn't come out the other side. I should have seen it the entire time, but I didn't. It was like the clown had walked through a door hidden by the sapling. I should have stayed asleep. I hoped that everything was some sort of waking dream. Pretending nothing happened was easier than the truth. The clown came back, though. Night after night, I watched as it danced around my backyard, and at the end of every night, it would vanish the same way. One night, it disappeared behind a garden hoe, only for it to appear seconds later from behind the lawnmower. Tonight, I found it digging a hole in the middle of the yard. I've never seen it do something like this before, and my immediate thought is that the clown is digging my grave. The hole got deeper and deeper as the clown dug until the top of the hole reached its head. Once finished, it stood at the edge of the hole motionless when out of nowhere, it jerked its head around. My heart pounded so hard that I could taste the copper in my mouth. I'm about to tear away from the curtain when I see it bend down and pluck a flower. The clown put the stem between its teeth and planted the shovel firm in the ground before stretching out pretended suspenders and admiring its work like a farmer. My heart was still racing at this point, but I was just glad that it didn't see me. And as if the thing read my mind, it turned on its heel and stared right at me. I never thought I'd actually pray for a heart attack. It spit out the flower and ran toward me, its feet flopping to the sides. It stopped a few feet from the house, grinning at me with filthy orange teeth as it pointed to the hole and waved me over excitedly like a child showing off a finger painting. Frozen in place, the only thing I could do was furiously shake my head no. The clown's smile fell and it scratched its head as if confused. Then it walked over to the hole and pointed at it again. I would have told it to fuck off if I could. It stood there for a moment before animatedly acting out its aha moment. It then waltzed over to the planted shovel and disappeared behind it. I stared wide-eyed, hoping it would reappear in the yard like before. I silently prayed for this until the moment I heard my closet creak open. I should have stayed asleep.
I don't like clowns. Nothing against them, just, yeah. All right. Well, now that I've hydrated, we're moving on. Let's see. No. Yeah, it ruined clowns forever. It definitely ruined clowns forever. Like Pennywise, the ruiner of clowns. Yep, exactly. Pennywise ruined clowns for clown kind. I feel really bad, but at the same time, like, nah, dude. Okay, next up, we have a story called Scorpion River. Feel free to read along with me as I read aloud. I'd always been afraid of Scorpion River. Ever since I was 8, I'd gone with my aunt, uncle, and older cousin into the wilderness of southern Arizona, where we'd spend 2 nights in their rickety blue camper. We weren't alone. Around 10 other families joined us for that December weekend. The adults sat around the fire, swapping stories of better days. Back when the economy was stable and kids respected their elders, blah, blah, blah. The 7 or so of us children quickly grew bored with the talk and went exploring. To call Scorpion River a river was an overstatement. Water only ran there once or twice a year. The rest of the time, it was just an expanse of sand. Our campsite was close to the river, yet the sandy cliffs meant that one had to fight through half a mile of cat claws and ancient mesquite trees to get to it. Mesquite trees. Yet every day without fail, we'd make the trip. It was worth it to play games of tag in the flat sand or to make forts below the huge cottonwoods which lined that part of the river. Every time an adult would come with us, much to our annoyance. They made sure we kept to the stretch of cottonwood. The only time we were allowed to leave that was when the group of adults decided to hike to what we called the funnel. The funnel was a natural rock formation. A vertical tunnel cut up through the cliffs on the other side of the river. It was beautiful, a type of smooth, reddish stone which seemed to lead up into the sky itself. It was easily my favorite part of the trip. The only thing I didn't like was getting there. To reach the funnel, we had to pass through what I called Raven Forest. Here, the trees were close together, the bark blackened by some ancient fire. Every time we went through, the screeching of ravens would fill the air. The light played tricks on your eyes, making it seem as if there were figures standing in the shadows. As I grew older, the feelings of unease grew too. I began to hear whispering in the trees, voices always too low to be understood, but distinctly unfriendly. I spoke about it to my cousin, Jade, but she dismissed it, telling me it was my imagination. Every year, more and more strange things would happen, inexplainable, but just strange enough to put me on edge. Nothing stayed where we put it. Camper doors would open and close of their own accord. The campfire would sometimes flare without warning. My aunt and uncle once brought their German Shepherd, thinking he would have a fun time running with the kids. For the entire trip, he stayed close to camp, whimpering whenever we attempted to get him to come down to the river with us. As strange as things got, nothing downright out of the ordinary happened. Not until one year, the year Jade and I turned 18, when my 16-year-old cousin Mason decided to come camping with us. He was a tall youth, big for his age, football player with something to prove. As there were 3 of us and we were older now, my aunt and uncle decided we could go out by ourselves. Every chance we got, we went down to the river to explore, no longer hindered by the younger children. Jade and Mason often got annoyed with me, as I always refused to enter Raven Forest. Jade wanted to climb the trees as she was going through a gymnastics phase, while Mason wanted to prove he wasn't afraid of an old, spooky forest. One evening, the 2 couldn't stand it anymore and told me they were going in whether I came with them or not. I declined, and the two disappeared into the woods, leaving me alone at the edge of the river. I sat down on the little cliff and waited as the sun began to sink below the tree line. I gradually became aware of a horrible smell coming from a nearby stand of bushes. I grew curious and went over to investigate. The bushes were low and thorny, forcing me to crawl to get through. I crawled on hands and knees over the uneven ground, finally stopping when my fingers touched something soft. I took out my phone flashlight and shone it on the ground. Instantly, I was moving backward, ignoring the thorns which tore at my hair. For, lying on the ground, was a pile of dead songbirds, heads missing, surrounded by blood and ants. I pulled myself to the edge of the river and stayed there, breathing hard, trying not to throw up. Several minutes later, my cousins returned, talking and laughing. They stopped when they saw me sitting on the cold ground, shivering. "What happened?" Jade asked. I numbly pointed towards the stand of trees. The two of them went over to look, returning a moment later, faces grave. "What would do that?" I asked. "Some kind of predator?" Jade suggested. "You know, like a fox, a coyote, something." "Why would it just pile them up like that? There must be 50 of them, all lined up in a circle like—" "Let's leave," Mason interrupted. "It's almost dark." We started towards the other side of the river, walking at first, then running. "I really think we're overreacting," Jade said when we reached the other side and paused to catch our breath. "There must be some logical explanation. Maybe they just happened to be there and we weren't arranged like it seemed. Did any of us really look hard?" "The heads were missing," Mason said. "Explain that." "They might have rotted away." The longer we talked, the more reasonable the birds seemed. After around 10 minutes of proposing theories, we were calm. Mason decided to try climbing the cliff to get to camp instead of going through the riverbed, which was muddy from a recent rain. He'd just gotten a new pair of red Converse and didn't want them ruined. Jade and I, knowing how many thorn bushes were between us and camp, decided to go down the river before going up the cliff. We split up. Once we were about halfway up the path, we heard rustling in the bushes. Thinking it was a deer, we ignored it and continued. Jade stopped to tie her shoe. "We should go up to the funnel," she said, bending down. "By ourselves?" I asked, scared yet a little excited. "Yeah." "That'd be—" I stopped. Behind her, in the thorn bushes, was a dark shape. It was hunched, humanoid, though in the growing darkness, it was hard to make out details. I glanced at Jade, and when I looked back, it was gone. "What is it?" Jade asked. I pointed. There was something there. It was probably Mason. She stood up. "Hey, Mason, get out here and stop trying to scare us." "Aw, come on," he called. I was relieved until he stepped out of the woods on the other side of the trail. There was no way he could have moved that fast and that quietly. I tried to explain what I'd seen to the two of them, but they just laughed it off. We spent the night around the campfire, listening to my uncle play guitar. That night, nothing strange happened, and we all woke up early, eager to go on our trip. We left just after the sun rose over the cliffs. In the daylight, the forest was decidedly less creepy. We went around half a mile down the river before climbing the cliff. This was the first time we'd done it alone, but we were confident we knew the way. At first, everything went pretty well. We found a little trail and started towards the cliff ahead. But pretty soon, I began to notice that this part of the forest wasn't familiar. The trees were even closer together than usual, and even though the sun was by now high in the sky, it seemed dark. Then the coyotes began howling. Though I knew they weren't dangerous to humans, it was still eerie hearing them in the distance. "Maybe we should go back," I suggested. "Nah," Jade said. "We can still find the funnel. Let's just get off this path. It should be like a mile west of here." "I'll go first," Mason said. "I've got a leather jacket and you don't." When we left the path, I thought I heard the whispering, though it was hard to hear over the racket my cousin was making by breaking a path through the trees for us. Finally, we reached a small stream bed, long since dried up, yet not overgrown. A minute or two later, we reached a funnel. We all knew instantly it wasn't the one we were used to. It was smaller, yet went further into the cliff face, more of a canyon than a tunnel. As we entered it, I noticed something far up near the top, around 200 feet above us. It was too far away to make out what it was, so I decided to climb a little way up the other side of the canyon. Meanwhile, Jade and Mason went farther into the canyon. I could hear them talking as I climbed as far up the wall as I could get. As I still couldn't see what it was, I decided to take a picture with my phone. I pointed it and snapped the picture, deciding to see if my uncle, who was into photography, could somehow enhance it. I started to climb down and tripped. I landed hard on the floor of the funnel, glad for my thick coat. I heard rustling in the bushes to my left and waited to hear the others laughing at my circumstances. Yet no sound came. "Guys," I called. "We're up ahead," Jade replied faintly. I started to go after them, having to squeeze between the trees and under the bushes, which clung stubbornly to the dirt floor of the funnel. Suddenly, I had the feeling of being watched. Again, branches cracked. I wanted to turn and tell whoever it was to cut it out, but my body wouldn't respond. I froze as the sounds grew closer and closer. The whispering increased in volume. Then the spell was broken as Mason called my name. The frozen feeling disappeared and I turned, ready to confront whatever it was. Nothing was there. I hurried to join my cousins who stood below the object on the funnel wall. From here it was apparent that it was a bit bigger than I was. Something dripped from it, leaving trails of dark liquid on the pale wall. Around it circled several ravens. "Think that's a nest?" Jade asked before I could tell them what had happened. "Maybe," Mason replied, shading his eyes. We stayed there for a few moments trying to make out what it was before growing bored. "Race you to the entrance," Mason called. He ran off through the trees, ignoring the thorny bushes. Jade and I followed more slowly, knowing we couldn't beat him. Then, above the sound of our own footsteps, I became aware of a distant voice, rising and falling in some sort of haunting song. It sounded female, but there was something unnatural about it, as if we were hearing a recording played backwards. "Do you hear that?" Jade asked. I nodded. We ran to the entrance of the funnel, where we met Mason. "Did you hear singing?" I asked. "No," he replied. "What are you talking about?" "Didn't you hear anything?" She shook her head. "No, we should head back." We were then confronted by a problem. We didn't exactly know how to get back to the river without having to push our way through thorn bushes. Finally, we had no choice but to start moving. Mason led the way, pushing through thorns and bushes without a care. Jade and I followed more slowly, carefully avoiding the worst of the thorns. After a few minutes, the two of us were separated from him. We found ourselves in a circle of thorn bushes with no easy way out. "Mason!" I called. He didn't respond, though he couldn't have gotten more than 10 feet ahead. We sat down, deciding he'd come back eventually. My feeling of unease began to grow. Finally, Jade spoke, voice small and quivering. "I don't think we're alone." I nodded, feeling my muscles begin to lock with fear. From the direction of the funnel came the sound of something pushing through the trees. Jade's eyes met mine, and I knew she could hear it too. "We need to get out of here," I said, eyeing the thorns which surrounded us. For some reason, I had no idea how we got inside the little clearing. The sounds were growing louder along with the whispering. All at once, I realized something. The voices had never been threatening me. They'd been trying to warn me. I got to my feet and pulled Jade up. "We're leaving," I said. I pushed through the bushes, ignoring the stinging of the cuts the thorns left on my arms and face. Jade followed, and we ran through the forest. At one point, I tripped and Jade pulled me to my feet. Behind us, the sounds were growing closer and more urgent. The voices weren't whispering anymore. They were screaming. For what seemed like 1,000 years, we ran through the forest. Though it was only a mile, it felt like 100. Finally, we ran out into the river, nearly knocking over Mason. The voices stopped, along with the crashing of whatever was pursuing us. "Where were you?" he asked as we tried to catch our breath. "I've been calling you for hours." "Hours?" I asked. We weren't apart for more than 20 minutes. He shook his head. I was just about to go get help. I noticed that the sun directly overhead when we left the funnel was beginning to set. Jade laughed, the sound a little too high. We must have looked dumb, she said, running from nothing like that. Nothing? I asked. We must have just imagined it. Really, Jade? It was probably just some animal. We started walking back to camp, and soon I began to believe we'd imagined whatever had happened too. I heard the sound of the singing and ignored it, deciding I was imagining it again. Then I noticed that the other two were looking at me in horror. They could hear it too. We began running, not stopping until we reached the camp. When we told our story, the adults just laughed, blaming it on overactive imaginations. My uncle, who had been visiting the area since he was a child, claimed there was no second funnel. We soon packed up and drove home. As it was late by the time we reached our hometown, I decided to spend the night with Jade and go to my house the following morning. While we were there, I remembered the picture I'd taken of the thing in the funnel. I asked my uncle to enhance it, and he agreed. It'll probably be a nest, he said as he worked. You probably disturbed the ravens, which decided to chase you off. I didn't agree, though I didn't say so. Oh, kids, he continued with a smile. I used to be like you. One time, I remember thinking... He stopped. The smile disappeared instantly. He got up and backed away from the computer. Then he turned and ran for the phone. Jade and I looked at the now enhanced picture. The thing was not a nest. In fact, it was a body. Headless like the birds we'd seen in the tree grove. Though the picture was still blurry, the jacket the figure wore was unmistakably black leather. On his feet was a pair of bright red Converse. Just then, the doorbell rang. Girls, my aunt called. Mason's here. That is so fucked up. So my theory is that when they lost track of Mason for that short period of time, or here's the other thing. Remember in the story, she said she saw somebody hunched up like a figure and was looking at them. I bet you that was the moment that, like, either it was right then or right before then or right after then that Mason got killed. It's so fucking crazy. I don't like that. I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Not a fan. Not a fan. River just yeah, no, agree. Alrighty. Don't recommend. See, you know what bugged me the most about that story is how they kept trying to rationalize shit. Like, you can't just be scared. You can't just be like, hey, there's something freaky going on and we need to leave. Like, no, we're just going to rationalize 50 birds without their heads, you know, and act like that there was nothing wrong. Like, get the fuck out of here with that shit. Hell no. Hell to the no. Like, if you were... the minute I saw 50 dead birds without their heads, I'm like, okay, that's it. I'm done. I'm out of here. Must have been my imagination. Like, how do you imagine 50 dead birds with no heads? How do you imagine that shit? Yes, I have never seen a bird mass sacrifice. And if that's the case, I don't need to get out more. I need to stay in the house. We don't know, we don't go. Exactly. We don't know, we don't go. That is the number one rule in this house. We don't know, we don't go. I mean, you're right. If they weren't dumb, we wouldn't have stories. Water break. I used to be fearless. Horror movies never really scared me. Scary books had no effect. Haunted houses are meaningless. I was never a child who slept with the covers over their face or with a nightlight. As a little girl, I never felt the need to crawl into bed with my mother after having a nightmare. I never really had nightmares to begin with, and the few that I did, most would never consider a nightmare at all. I've simply never been afraid of what goes bump in the night. Our home's security system kept away fears of very real humans with dark intentions, as did our Rottweiler, aptly named Killer. As for threats outside the home, well, who could be afraid in a nice, white, upper-class community? I've lived in a bland bubble all my life, never knowing what fear is. So, why should I ever be afraid of the dark? Up until this moment, I haven't been. I saw it as childish and illogical. Of course, I don't feel that way anymore. I'm writing this to you now as a warning because it's too late for me. I know that now, and it's brought on a surreal sort of calm. When I finish warning you, it will all be over. So forgive me if I'm being long-winded. I enjoyed life a bit more than I was once willing to admit. It all started with what I thought was a virus. I had been linked to a video called Girls and Boys Come Out to Play. It sounded harmless enough. I thought it was an art student's film, perhaps. The person who had linked the video promised it was very good. Well worth watching. I can't remember the video. All I can remember is the feeling it brought up. It wasn't fear, but it was close. I was uncomfortable. I was unnerved. I was also vaguely ill. From then on, things only got worse. The background on my computer had changed to a picture of a disturbed-looking young woman who stared at me from a black abyss. Every now and then, and growing more frequent by the day, strange noises would emit from my computer, even when the sound wasn't on. Screaming, strange laughter, grinding noises. At the time, I was annoyed. The fear hadn't settled in quite yet. Then, the faces started popping up, like those ridiculous screamers that scared my friends in high school. Yet, these were different. They looked real. They were the faces of the dead, and they had died violent deaths. I wish I could say that I stopped using the computer, but I couldn't. My job requires me to use my computer frequently. What was I to do? I had no other computer available to me. I tried to take it in to have the virus removed, but no one could help me. They said there wasn't a virus. They said the computer was fine. Meanwhile, it got worse. The faces weren't just popping up, they would stay. And with those horrible, rotted eyes, they would hold my gaze. I couldn't look away from them and their terrible, mocking grins, and oh God, the smell. My computer forever had a vague stench of death around it. I thought I was going crazy. I thought that perhaps someone was messing with me. The people at the computer repair place didn't know what they were talking about. Something was wrong. But I knew that it had to be something very real that just had to be fixed. So I got a new computer. Everything was fine for a while, but then it all came back. And in full force. Now there were voices. Now there was screaming. Now the rotted faces showed their stinking bodies. I could see every maggot, every fly, every pus-filled crevice. And they were calling to me. Telling me that soon, very soon, I'd be joining them. They were so angry that I had tried to get rid of them, and now they would make me pay. I didn't know what to do. Ignoring the problem wasn't working. Perhaps it came from the emails they had been sending me. I never thought it was the video, not for a second. After all, that just wasn't logical. I was at the end of my rope.
Today, I unplugged the computer and began packing. I would go on vacation, clear my head, and pray that everything would be back to normal. A few minutes ago, I realized it would not. The power went out, and for the first time in my life, I felt true fear. I had no idea that in a few moments, it would become mind-numbing. I stumbled through the house looking for a flashlight when I saw that something was still giving off light. The computer. The unplugged computer was on, and the woman in the background was moving, beckoning me over. I couldn't help myself. I sat down across from her with the darkness caving in all around me, and then the woman, like all of the other images I've seen before, began to rot away. The whole scene rotted away, and then the screen went black. And without light, without a means of seeing my reflection, I saw her behind me for the briefest of moments, a bloody and rusted knife in hand. The computer came back to life, and my old background had returned. But I know it's not over. So, I've decided to come here. I know you all like to be scared, right? Well, take it from someone who has only very recently known fear. It's not always worth it, and not everything is fun and games. Of course, you probably won't believe me. Why should you? The thing is, I haven't been completely honest with you. There was no video. It was a story. A story quite similar to this one, though with subtle plot differences and perhaps better storytelling. I know all of you like stories that might give you a good scare. That's probably why you started reading mine. Now that you've read this, you'll share my fate. I know it's cruel and perhaps unfair, but it has to be done. I just hope that you can take comfort in knowing that when I'm the woman haunting your computer, I'll be a bit more gentle. If I can, I'll use a blade that's a little less dull. Pictures of those who came before us who are a little less grotesque. Sounds that are a little less alarming. But then again, you do like to be scared, right? Don't worry. I won't ask you to repost this story 5 times. Nothing will save you. After all, nothing could save me. The power is still out, and I know, behind me, the woman is waiting for me. I'll see you soon. Very soon. Goodbye. For now.
Why are my laughs always so different? I don't understand. They're all so different. I don't get it. Sad face. Anyway. Listen, I don't understand. Listen, I don't know. Okay. Let's see here. Ooh, that's real long. Yeah, literally, that's what that story was. If I die, I'm taking you with me. Like, bruh. Revenge from the grave is not necessary. Alright, next story. Party of you only, please. God. Okay. All right, next story is Return Carts Here. Please follow with me as I read aloud. As the operations manager for a large discount store, it is my job to ensure that the various electrical and mechanical systems, such as cash registers, pricing guns, and even the toilets and the restrooms, are working as they should be. A few weeks ago, I got word that my store was going to be the field testing site for a new type of shopping cart. In over 20 years with the company, I had yet to encounter a shopping cart that didn't turn into a piece of shit once the customers got a hold of it. Now, our company was going to waste thousands of dollars on the next high-tech turd from the ass of modern shopping. A few days after being notified, I received a large envelope in the mail packet with colorful, pointless propaganda on the cart design, as well as some survey cards for my employees and customers to fill out once the shopping carts arrived. I read through the material that night and was sort of blah about the whole thing. They were just shopping carts, after all. To say I couldn't care less that they were made of some new eco-friendly polymer or that they could hold twice the weight of a traditional cart would be an understatement. I was pretty sure the customers weren't going to care much either. I also didn't see anything state-of-the-art or top-of-the-line about them in the literature, but I was going to reserve final judgment for when I saw them in person. When the carts finally arrived, I had to begrudgingly admit that they were nice to look at least as nice as a shopping cart can be. They were equal parts black and white and made mostly of thick plastic with a few pieces of metal in the framework. The thing I liked most about them was that they weren't rectangular like most carts. They had an almost oval shape to them. All of the edges were rounded off, and the basket was large in the front and narrow near the center, which gave them the appearance of some sort of space-age transport device. The carts also had great maneuverability. I took one through the store for a test drive and was surprised at how well it handled. I was able to make tight turns into the aisles with no problem. When I took the corners fast, the cart didn't tip over like the old ones did. The wheels never left the ground, nor did they wobble. I knew our customers were going to be pleased with them, and I was proud that my store was the first to have them. This pride wouldn't last. 2 days after receiving the carts, everything seemed to be going great. Customers really liked them, and a few even admitted to coming to the store just to check them out after hearing about them from a friend. It wasn't until the third day that things started to change. For the most part, that day was just like any other. I had to deal with the usual frustrated customers, annoying employees, and the occasional register glitch. It wasn't until I locked up for the night and was returning to my car that my week started getting shitty. I usually park my car near one of those landscape islands bordered by a curb. Every large parking lot usually has a few of them. They tend to be covered in grass with a couple of trees or those thick bushes with the prickly leaves. If I park next to one of those, there are a limited number of cars that can park around me. In my mind, that minimizes the possibility of accidents. Having to park in a high-traffic parking lot for 40 to 50 hours a week can be hazardous to the bodywork of your vehicle. I see nothing wrong in trying to ward off any possible damage from ignorant customers whenever I can. That day, the only spot open that wasn't a mile from the front entrance of the store was right next to one of the cart corrals. I don't like parking next to them if I can help it, but when it was between that and walking the length of a football field, well, I'll take the easy walk every time. When I think back on that day, I mentally kick myself for not moving my car. I'm sure if I went outside during one of my breaks, I would have been able to find a better parking space. As I approached my car that night, I didn't notice anything unusual until I walked around to the driver's side. There, pressed up against the side of my car door, was one of the new shopping carts. My first reaction was to mutter a few curse words at the lazy shopper who couldn't be bothered to place the cart in the corral in the first place. I mean, come on, it was no more than 2 feet away. It's irritating, but a common thing in parking lots around the world. I didn't get pissed until I pulled the cart away, revealing the fist-sized dent in the door. Now, I'll admit, I have a bit of a temper, I probably should have taken a moment to calm down and just pushed the cart into the corral. However, it felt really good when my foot connected with the cart, knocking it onto its side. It felt even better when I noticed the kick had caused a good-sized crack along one of the side of the cart's plastic baskets. A crack for a dent. I figured that made us even. I left the busted cart on its side, got in my car, and drove home. I knew the opening manager would deal with it when he got in. Thankfully, I had the day off, so I wouldn't have to hear about it until I returned to work on Friday. The following day, I contacted my insurance company to see about getting the dent fixed. After spending an hour on the phone dissecting my policy with someone who barely spoke English, I decided it would be cheaper and less of a headache to just go to a body shop and pay for it myself. And that is exactly what I did. My one day off that week wasted on getting a small dent repaired. When I returned to work, I wasn't in the best of moods to begin with, but I became even more irritated when I saw a lot of the new carts strewn about the parking lot, most of which were only a few steps from a cart corral. Damn lazy customers. I was sure I wasn't going to be the only one with a dented door that week. I gathered up a few of the strays and slammed them into the nearest corral with enough force to cause it to slide forward a few inches. I didn't give a damn if any more of the new carts got damaged. On my way to the front office, I was stopped by the freight manager who informed me that we had a return truck the next day and that I needed to get my stuff processed. One of my duties is to sign off on all defective merchandise and get it boxed up and ready to be shipped back to the warehouse. Once I dropped my stuff off in the office, I walked to the back of the store to the receiving bay. That is where we kept all of the unprocessed returns from the past week. As I surveyed the pile of returns, I noticed a single cart parked in the corner with a handwritten note that said, "Damaged." I guess I was going to have to deal with that thing one last time. I didn't mind. Nothing would have made me happier at that moment than to send that cart back to the warehouse, knowing it was going to be destroyed. I decided to process it last and savor my victory over it. As I was filling out the forms for the assortment of broken electronics and home goods, there was a short, loud squeak. Sort of like the sound a rusty hinge would make when being forced open too quickly. I looked up, but couldn't immediately see anything that would make that kind of noise. I dismissed the sound and continued my work. I was, after all, in a large receiving bay with metal doors, metal racking, and various other metal objects all capable of squeaking. I returned to my paperwork, and the moment my pen touched the paper, the squeak returned. I continued writing, ignoring it altogether, but after a while it became pretty bothersome. I waited until it started again, then quickly whirled around to pinpoint where the sound was coming from. In the process of turning, my elbow caught the edge of a box of packing tape and sent it falling to the floor, the sound of which made it impossible to tell where the squeaking was coming from. I bent over to pick up the box and muttered profanities to myself as the squeaking recommenced. This time it was louder and more insistent, and I was really starting to get pissed off over it. I looked up and yelled out in frustration, but my cry was cut short when the source of the squeaking slammed into my forehead, knocking me onto my ass. I was dazed for a second and confused as to what had happened. I tried to make sense of it, but it was completely crazy. Somehow, the shopping cart that was in the opposite corner of the room squeaked its way across the receiving bay and rammed itself into my forehead. It wasn't just a casual roll either. There was some force behind it. If I didn't know any better, I'd say the cart was pushed, but there was no way for someone to enter the receiving bay without me noticing. I stood up, rubbed the spot on my head where I was hit. I could feel the tight knot of a bump already forming. That cart was going to pay. There was no way I was ever going to let it roll again. In the corner of the receiving bay, behind the toolbox, is a large sledgehammer. For the longest time, I wondered why it was there. We've never had the cause to use it, yet there it sat for many years. In that moment, I decided I would make use of it. I grabbed the mallet, Walked over to where the cart had come to rest against the bay doors. Guys. I half expected the cart to flee as I raised the hammer over my head and brought it down on the folding child seat behind the handlebar. The force of the blow flipped it back onto its side, where I continued to beat it until it was a mess of broken plastic and bent metal. I kept smashing it until I could no longer lift the hammer, then gathered up the pieces and threw them into the trash compactor. Satisfied that the cart would never bother me again, I finished processing the damaged products, then left the receiving bay and headed to the front office with a smile on my face. As I turned down the household consumer... Guys. Okay, sorry. All right, hold on. Is this too much? Woo! Okay, I got it. It's all right. As I turned down the household consumable aisles, I had to move aside to let a young woman wheel her cart by. As she was about to pass me, the cart she was pushing suddenly turned, causing the bottom bar of the frame to collide with my shin. "I'm so sorry," she apologized. "I don't know what happened. I was pushing it straight ahead and it just turned on its own. I'm really sorry." "It's okay," I managed to say through clenched teeth. I continued walking with a slight limp now until I made it to the food aisle, which was a straight shoot for the front of the store. I made it past 3 more aisles before I was blindsided and knocked onto the floor. As I got up, ready to give someone a piece of my mind, a shopping cart rolled past me with an older gentleman hobbling after it as fast as he could. "Sorry, these new carts move so fast, I guess it got away from me," he said once he was able to regain control of the cart. "Don't worry about it," I groaned, and then stood up and continued walking despite the pain in my head, my shin, and now my side. While walking, I stopped at each aisle to make sure no one else was going to try and run me over with a shopping cart. This got me several peculiar looks from the new customers and employees I passed, but I didn't give a shit. I was in pain and had a crazy suspicion the carts were out to get me. When I made it up to the front of the store, I picked up my pace until I was practically running. Once inside the office, I closed the door and locked it. The first thing I did was grab the bottle of aspirin that we keep in the desk drawer and dry swallow 3 pills. Then I sat down and tried to wrap my mind around the crazy series of events that took place. It couldn't be true. Carts were inanimate constructs of metal and plastic. They don't think, they can't feel pain. There was no sane reason to think they were sentient. After sitting down and thinking about the situation rationally for a while, I was able to convince myself that I was just the victim of a series of bizarre events that just so happened to share a common factor. This, however, did not stop me from avoiding carts for the rest of the evening. Just in case. Once I closed at the registers for the night and let all the employees leave, I let out a big sigh of relief. I couldn't wait to get home. I walked outside and was irritated to see that no one bothered to bring in the carts. This was supposed to be done by the stock crew before they left, but they had a convenient habit of forgetting most nights. At least they were all corralled and I wasn't parked anywhere near them, even though I knew I would get shit for it the next day. I was going to leave them where they were. I approached my car feeling more and more relieved with each step I took. It would be nice to put this nightmare of a day behind me, but I wasn't free just yet. A faint squeaking started in the distance, causing my heart to skip a beat. I turned around and scanned the parking lot for a runaway cart, but they were all in the corrals. I quickly walked around the back of my car and toward the driver's side door, pulling my keys out of my pocket as quickly as I could. I was in such a haste to grab them that they slipped from my fingertips onto the pavement. I knelt down to pick them up, knowing my backside was now a perfect target. The squeaking returned the moment my hands closed around the keys. It was louder, signaling to me that it was close by. I rose up, but my hands had started shaking, making it difficult to grasp the keys. I tried to catch them before they hit the ground again, but all I managed to do was knock them under the car instead. I got down on my hands and knees and looked under the car to see where the keys fell and nearly pissed myself at what I saw. Several black rubber wheels squeaked by on the opposite side of my car, taunting me as they made their way around the vehicle. The first cart hit me from behind and dropped me onto my stomach, causing me to scrape my hands up in the process. The second cart hit me on my right side, smack dab in the middle of my ribs. There was a loud popping sound like a knuckle being cracked, then searing pain. I tried to roll over, but the pain was too great. That was when the third cart hit me on the side of the head, colliding with enough force for it to roll right over me. The sound of squeaking was then replaced by a loud ringing thanks to my injured ear. I felt a warm liquid oozing out of it as I began feeling nauseous and dizzy, unable to tell which way was up and which was down. I was in so much pain, my vision blurred and started to dim. I tried to get up, but my muscles refused to cooperate. As I felt the darkness of oblivion closing in, I turned to my side and was able to focus my eyes long enough to see the line of carts, each waiting to take their turn. I awoke in the hospital 3 days later with a concussion, a broken leg, several broken ribs, and an assortment of colorful cuts and bruises. There was also some form of amnesia present as I couldn't remember why I was in the hospital. Once the doctor found out I was awake, he came by and gave me a rundown of my injuries and his prognosis of my recovery after first assessing the extent of my memory loss. I was hoping he would tell me what happened, but before I could ask him, my memory was rudely returned to me by a familiar sound. The squeaking started somewhere out in the hall and then stopped. After a 30-second pause, it started again, then as quickly as it started, it stopped once more. "Is something wrong?" the doctor asked, noticing the large drops of sweat that began to snake down my forehead. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. "The squeaking." Right after I said that, the squeaking began again, but much louder. My memory was still fuzzy, but I knew that squeaking sound was no good. I was terrified. Before the doctor could tell me what happened, I jumped out of bed and ran to the door, tipping over my IV stand in the process. Just as I was about to slam the door shut behind me, I was hit in the stomach by something rolling into my room. At the moment of impact, my amnesia completely vanished. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I didn't expect you to be out of bed," the nurse gasped as she ran over to help me. Once she and the doctor helped me back into bed and made sure I hadn't added to my list of injuries, I was able to see the thing that gut busted me was nothing more than a little rolling cart used to deliver medicine. I felt silly, but then I thought to myself, maybe it knows. I started screaming for them to get it out of the room. It took 2 orderlies and the doctor to subdue me long enough to inject me with a sedative. The next few days, they kept me sufficiently drugged up and did a few tests to make sure there wasn't anything wrong with my head that would make me lash out the way I had. During that time, I was able to keep myself under control, mostly thanks to the medicine. By the end of the week, the doctor felt I was healthy enough to leave. I was cleared to speak with a police officer about what happened the night of my accident. The officer told me I was found lying on the ground by the driver of a street sweeper that came to clean the parking lot. Apparently, he thought I was mugged. Considering how crazy the truth was, I decided it would be best to just stick with that, with what the authorities believed. It was true, in a way. Nothing was stolen, but I was beat up, just not by anything human. I told the officer I was jumped from behind it as I went to get in my car and didn't get a look at my attacker. That seemed to satisfy him. He handed me his card and told me to call him if I remembered anything else. On the day I was to be released from the hospital, my boss came in to see me and give me a ride home. We talked about nonsense for a while before I asked him about the carts and if the store was going to keep them. "Oh, don't worry about the carts," he said. "The company has decided to add them all to the stores. Add them to all the stores. They'll still be there when you get back." That's what I was afraid of. Guys, I'm so sorry I started laughing in the middle of that story. I just imagine this poor person getting fucked up by some shopping carts, and it was too funny. Like, I legitimately lost my mind. And it doesn't help that, like, Levada was laughing in the other room and I could hear her. I'm so sorry. Like, I was like, is this story really going where I think it's going? not mean to laugh. See, this is why, Lancelot, literally, I'm that person that I go out of my way to like put shopping carts back into the cart corrals. Because I hate that shit. That shit makes me mad. But the fact that she like took a sledgehammer to the shopping cart makes me laugh so much. It's so over the top for no reason. It was just too much. I don't want to get beat up by some shopping carts. I've actually right in the baby seat. Laveda, do you remember that time we were living in Texas and we saw that shopping cart because the wind and the rain was so intense? We were in the parking lot at Walmart. Do you remember the shopping cart literally from the other side of the parking lot got blown into the cart corral? I will never forget that shit. That made me laugh so hard. I was like, that is some supernatural, unnatural shit. It was so funny. So funny. I was like, what the fuck? Did that actually happen? Wait, I'm not even kidding, guys. She is my witness. We watched this shopping cart in the Walmart parking lot. We watched this shopping cart from one side of the parking lot. It was windy and it was rainy and it blew itself all the way into the cart corral. It was insane. No, it wasn't an oval cart. It was just like one of those regular like rectangle carts. She's scared. Back where you belong. Exactly. See, Lavetta can't stop laughing because she's remembering. That was the most unreal shit. We were just sitting in the car watching. I was like, is this for real? It was too funny. It was too much. It was the most insane thing I'd ever seen. It just wanted to go home. Exactly. It just wanted to go home, guys. That's all it wanted. That was too funny. God, she's still laughing in the other room. I can hear it. I know, like, why would you do that? Why would you take a sledgehammer to some shopping carts? Like, it's not even that serious. Like, all you had to do was just, like, put the cart back. You didn't have to kick it over. Calm down. All right. I mean, essentially, that's what the cart says. Like, you think you can hit me and get away with it? Oh, she earned that. She earned that beating. The cart corral beating she got. She earned that, Chief. Da 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 da. All we had to do was push the damn cart, CJ. All we had to do was follow the train, CJ. Golly. It's too much. Hey, Audie. All right. Water break.
It wasn't long ago I noticed a strange noise coming from the air conditioning unit in the wall of the living room. At first it was almost imperceptible from the other noises such as a device would typically make. It started out as a slight clanking sound, only when it was first turned on. I had just accredited it to the age of the apartments and the appliances within. Realistically, they weren't all that old in the grand scheme of things, but Without constant upkeep, things break down and fall apart relatively fast. Everything in the place made at least some kind of noise. The washing machine shook, the dishwasher sounded like a jet taking off, and the fridge would kick on every few minutes and hum so loudly I'd have to turn the television up to hear anything over it. So, you can see how it wasn't such a big deal for the air conditioner to rattle a little. So I put it in the back of my mind as just something that comes with age. That was until it started making it more and more often. I first noticed it when I turned it on, and the rattling didn't just go away after a second or two. I better tell the landlord so maintenance can come fix this, I thought. After about a minute, it once again stopped and the thought faded into memory. A few weeks passed and I began to notice other strange occurrences. Scratching in the walls, the electricity flickering in and out, the occasional thump in the night. Again, things that could all happen due to the age of the wiring. Maybe a mouse had gotten into the walls or a noisy new neighbor had moved in. All pretty explainable, I thought. Besides, I worked a lot and really didn't have a lot of free time to do much, so it didn't really bother me. But when things started to go missing in my tiny one-bedroom apartment, I started to worry. I hadn't been home in what felt like a couple of weeks. Between work and friends, I was barely there at all besides to sleep and bathe. I figured I should do a thorough search of the place and see where my things could have gone. The TV remote, a calculator, and several pairs of socks and one shoe were apparently misplaced. So I went through room to room, which was really only 4 rooms, searched high and low to find my things, and as I did this, I noticed more and more small, ineffectual things were also missing. Strange, I thought. Where could these things have gone? I hit the power button on the TV and sat down in my once familiar armchair, now a stranger in my own forgotten home, and noticed something. The TV wasn't on. I flipped the light switch up and down, but nothing. Oh, for God's sakes, this is getting a little ridiculous. I got up and twisted the knob on the stereo. Nothing. I went around and tested all the appliances to see if they were still all functioning. To no avail, as not a thing in the place was still functioning except, strangely enough, the increasingly loud air conditioner. It came on with a loud rattle and ran that way for several minutes until it sparked. I heard a loud pop and then it too died. Maybe the power's out and it will be fine in the morning, I thought half-heartedly. I had a hard time sleeping that night. The neighbors were especially loud, and being without power made me nervous. I woke up the next morning to find that the power was still out. I took a shower, got dressed, and went over to my neighbors to ask if they were having similar problems. I knocked loudly several times, but no answer. I decided enough was enough and went to the maintenance office to complain and hopefully resolve this issue. When I opened the door, the smell of stale smoke swept into my nostrils. The place was a mess, papers and ashes all about the desk, peeling paint, smudges on the windows, and a TV with only static bolted to the wall. Sitting behind the desk was a thin, graying man who looked as if he hadn't bathed in a week. I told him about how everything was suddenly not working but the AC unit until it sputtered its last. He gave me a sarcastic look, and with a gruff, he grabbed his toolbox and followed me back to my apartment. You see, I would have called, but for some reason nothing seems to be working, and I don't think the electricity is out because the air conditioner was running and suddenly died.
Well, let's take a look at it,
he said. He went over to it and unscrewed the faceplate and peered inside. He clicked his flashlight on and went to work unscrewing and checking different things when he stopped suddenly and pulled out a tiny thing attached to a cord that didn't look like it belonged. He looked at me with a raised eyebrow.
This yours?
I couldn't even identify what he was holding. I don't believe so. What is it?
It's one of those little spy cameras. You haven't been having girls over secretly taping them, have you?
He gave me a sly grin. No, what the hell was that doing in my home? I was getting a little scared and a little irate. He shrugged.
Well, let's see where this wire goes, huh?
He followed the wire with his hand and stopped to look inside.
There's a little hole in here. It goes into the wall.
He pulled out his hammer and got to work taking chunks out of the drywall and followed the cord. I was freaking out. Who put that there? Was this dirty old man watching me? Are there more of those? All these things went through my head as I watched him work.
Well, that explains a lot.
He said under his breath. What? What is it? I exclaimed.
Looks like somebody rewired your outlets over here.
He backed away to show me what he was seeing. But why?
My guess, stealing your power. You sure you didn't notice anything?
His calmness put me on edge. I thought back to the odd noises on my walls, the thumping, the flickering lights. What had once seemed such a normal thing had my heart racing. I noticed a few things here and there, but I haven't been here a lot lately. I thought it was just an old place. He gave me a skeptical look and continued following the ever-expanding bunch of wires and cables throughout the place. Some wires would branch off to more tiny cameras, hidden in vents and just in the shadows. One even wired into the eye of one of my pictures. How have I not noticed these? My heart had started beating faster and faster as he discovered more. He kept going and, one by one, found all of my electricity had been rewired into one central bunch that led to the bedroom. My heart stopped. How long have these been here?
Not long, I'd say. We check all the appliances and outlets before we rent the places out.
Well, where does it all lead? He kept knocking holes with his hammer and following the dreaded cables until finally he stopped and looked into the most recent hole he made with a flashlight.
The space between the walls gets a lot bigger here. I think I can fit in here. I see something glowing just around the corner.
He smashed a hole big enough for him to squeeze through and disappeared into my bedroom wall. He appeared a few seconds later with a grim look on his face, and his skin had gone pale. He was no longer the calm, apparently fearless man he was before.
You aren't gonna want to hear this, but there's a little room back there. Bunch of monitors set up all over and all sorts of crap scattered around. Looks like somebody was living in there, but no sign of them now.
He swallowed hard.
This place is starting to freak me the hell out. If I were you, I'd move.
I packed my things and left my mom's that day, not wanting to spend another second in that place. Over the next few days, the police came and investigated the whole scene. They found 20 different monitors all linked up to VHS players in that little room in the wall. Surprisingly, though, no tapes were ever found. And neither was the thing that had been watching me all those nights. A few weeks had passed and a box arrived on my mother's doorstep. It was unlabeled, but inside was all the little things that had gone missing in my apartment. I also found a dirty, ripped piece of paper with a barely legible message scrawled on it. I like your new place much better.
Well then. Ahem. Yeah, I still can't with that fucking shopping cart story. It's too much. Too much. I still hear Laveda laughing in the other room. Okay. Alrighty. Okay. Let's see. Next story. Called Black Cab. Feel free to read with me as I read aloud. When Sean called me to hang, I still had no interest in eating. The wounds were still fresh in my mind, like the first car accident you had or getting fired from a job when you knew it was not your fault. Amanda had taken what was hers, pulled everything out of our place within my 8-hour shift at work. Her flock of kitchen gadgets, her massive DVD collection she had alphabetized and just knew when one of them was out of order, and her coldness. She had ended our shallow affair with a text message, and in the end, I knew it was for the best and couldn't blame her for leaving. I was too ashamed to admit to myself that it was a mistake, that I'd only been with her because I didn't want to be alone. I couldn't hate her, you know? She had been in nursing school for the last year, one of those accelerated programs where she did most of her stuff online and drove across the state once a week to sit in a classroom and prove that she knew the material she had studied religiously. I spent that weekend getting drunk on Captain Morgan and Bud Light. Then Sean called and we wound up at Baxter's, one of the local sports bars. So new and also so familiar to anyone who's ever been in one. They mostly are the same. Beer specials, 30 or more TVs, flirtatious servers, and a large outdoor patio for smokers and those who wanted to enjoy the fresh air in other ways. That was the first time I saw it. We were on the patio and Sean going a mile a minute about the latest girl he'd slept with. I was half watching ESPN News and half listening to him. Michael was managing that night. His red hair a stark contrast to the blue polo he was required to wear. His face, which normally bore the mask of confidence and authority in front of his employees, morphed in front of me, and suddenly I saw him as another manager trying to wrestle with his job and manage the everyday crap he saw. He knew he didn't have to demand respect from me. I gave it freely. "Hey, Chris, how are you?" I smiled at him. He tolerated a lot of my crap, but knew I treated his employees very well. "Well, I'm okay. How's the business tonight?" "Crappy. Nothing to watch on TV, no games until tomorrow, just college lacrosse, and earlier we watched the 1983 college basketball championship again." I grinned at him, seeing all the empty chairs in the place. I hoped it would pick up. Sal came in and sat next to me. He was about as New York Italian as you could get. He spoke in compact words, no wasting someone's time with fluff, and had a built-in knowledge of cars that was mystifying. Most times he would come in with Patrick, a stubby guy who looked like he would burn if you even talked about the sun for more than 2 minutes. Sal once introduced him as his business partner. They would diagnose cars as they went by, giving ideas for what was going on with them mechanically at the moment and what monster was waiting around the next corner for their owners. They would both have their glasses halfway to their mouths, pausing, listening as something sputtered or spurred by. Their synchronicity was fun to watch, and I think I learned more about vehicles listening to them than I ever got from my old man. Since we were so close to the tourist trap, we had our fair share of confused drivers who stole side glances at their GPS, clogged intersections, and people who would try to cut across 2 lanes of traffic to make their turns and only make things worse for those behind them. Then there are the cabs, mostly yellow, black phone numbers on the sides that only consisted of 3 different digits. Their names were knockoffs of the brands most people knew. Checker, etc. There were also the ones that you can tell people kept in their driveways and most likely didn't have the proper licenses, but their phone numbers were stenciled or painted on their sides. So I guess that gave them some sense of legitimacy. This was a few years before the ride-sharing revolution allowed anyone to stick a sign on their car and download an app. The cops never challenged them, and I was never sure if there was some unspoken rule on cabbies. A large sheriff's deputy who looked like he could bench press my car pulled me over for doing 3 miles over the limit one day. He wrote the ticket with deliberation while 2 of them had sped by, trying to bend space and time with the power of their engines and the heaviness of their foot. This one was different. It was larger, like it was a large van made for at least a dozen people, but with heavily tinted windows and no sign that it was even in business. Sean was on my right side, and Sal was on my left. Sal must have had the day off. This wasn't his usual night to be there. He stopped as it went by, his head cocked slightly, like his ears were hearing a faint tune he barely recognized. I listened with him. The engine was different, had a faint buzzing to it that seemed to shake you to your bones. I remember my skin breaking out in goose flesh. Maybe it wasn't even from this planet. I wish it had been that simple. I watched it go by and I strained to see what driver. My eyes met black tint. I continued with my 12-ounce curl and took a sip from my glass of Heineken. "What's that?" someone asked. Sean looked out onto the street, had 3 sheets to the wind, and saw nothing unusual. He was dressed in an Adam Ant retro shirt, cuff jeans, and a cheap white belt similar to what my father had worn when he was in the Navy back in the 80s. Black vest that looked 3 sizes too small for me but fit him perfectly completed his ensemble. I couldn't knock it. It worked for the ladies. He regularly layered alcohol over Xanax whenever he was here and liked to brag about his sexual exploits. The fan blew around his short black hair and did nothing to stop the beads of sweat from his brow. He could sweat bullets in a snowstorm. Just another cab, Chris." Sal asked, "What's the sign?" I went around the slow bend ahead, skirting what was left of the strip mall. "Where's the phone number to call dispatch for it?" I interjected. The bug had spread to me. I shifted a little, got up and took a few steps and craned myself over the railing, protecting the drunks from the road. This was a glorified strip mall, anchored by a local grocery store with inflated prices that peddled to tourists. Baxter's was close to the end, next to the Argentinian steakhouse on the end. Behind everything was swamp water, a family of feral cats and probably a monster or 2. But there was no proof of the latter. The vehicle was gone. I sat back down, deciding to get some hot and spicy boneless wings. Sean called me a couple of days later. I was at a red light. "Dude, remember the other night we were at Baxter's? You know a guy disappeared from the grocery store?" I looked up at that light. The sensors on this one was crappy. I could be here a while. "Really?" "Yeah, his wife and kid were inside the place. He left his wallet in the car and went out to get it, and then boom!" I wasn't that interested. I listened politely, then turned it around, asking him if I could borrow his copy of The Expendables. It wasn't until I saw the paper the next day that it made me stop and think. Police found out that the guy who had disappeared was a registered sex offender and had been molesting his daughter for a year. The story exploded. Even Nancy Grace got in on the act, citing the disappearance as retribution and a way for the family to put the past behind them and begin the healing process. I was neutral. He was gone. That's it. No big loss. It was that first rainy day and night of the summer when I saw it again. My Pontiac was purring through the rain, the rhythm of the wipers working a great beat against the Steely Dan song as I took the curvy road between the hotels. Every 50 feet or so, the neon blaring of a sign for the Hilton, Holiday Inn, or some other national brand lit up the inside of my car for a microsecond as I cruised through another curve on the road. The sun was dying and the sodium vapor arcs of the streetlights were casting an eerie, effervescent look as the street wound and stretched between the rows of hotels. I couldn't imagine the room rates of some of them, but you paid for the convenience of being so close to the theme parks. It came up behind me in the coming dark and stayed on my tail as I drove, wary of the red lights that seemed to be every other hotel. They changed quickly, giving everyone a big surprise, dropping brake pedals to the floor and mechanical screams. It had been raining, so it was a really bad idea to have that happen when the oil would be pooled on the surface of the road. You could slide right into someone else's path and could ruin someone's day regardless of what the tire shop told you what they would do to your stopping power if you spent the extra $80 a piece. Florida weather doesn't read warranties. It doesn't shop for tires. It doesn't care. The headlights lit up the inside of my car, and I thought I could hear music from inside it. It was playing an old Sinatra tune I didn't know, but I knew Frank's voice, even being hungover. I couldn't mistake it. I tapped my brakes a little to see what happened, and it backed off. Only if I had known then what I know now, I would have attempted to break the sound barrier with my Grand Am getting away from that beast. I would have wiped any cabbies in front of me off the road. The light changed and I toed the brake pedal again, this time for real. I stopped, almost expecting the van to run into the back end of the car, but it stopped with me. I glared at the red light, feeling this pressure on the back of my neck and head. It was like someone was grabbing me in an attempt to choke me out. It looked to the left, then the right. There were no cars at either side of the intersection, so there was no reason for the light to go red. These were set on sensor, not timer. I could hear my Steely Dan CD spinning in the player, and I felt my mouth go dry. I reached down to turn up Babylon's Sister when the small red digital readout scrambled. That's the only way to describe it. Strange symbols came across it, and Kid Rock blared from my speakers. I fumbled for the knob and killed it, suddenly aware that I was sweating. My stomach did a slow roll like the time I was dragged on my first wooden roller coaster when I was visiting Hershey Park when I was a kid. The inside of the car had gotten very hot. I reached out and touched the dashboard and felt like it had been sitting in the sun for several hours without my shades in place. My mouth had become glassy and the air tight. Like one of those random mental ghost thoughts, my brain leaped back to Sunday Bible school back in New York. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed is he who tries to bring heaven to earth. I wish I had paid more attention. I was raised a Methodist. Now I wanted to be Catholic and have a crucifix to touch. Maybe not. It would probably explode with all the crap I've done. I was once an atheist and said this when asked, but I had a hatred for life at that time. Maybe that black cab was for me. Maybe not. Whatever it was, that thing wasn't of this earth, or even heaven for that matter. In my mind, there was only one other option. The light turned green and I hit the gas more than I should have. I wanted that thing away from me. Something blurred by me and I realized that it was gone. My CD had come back on and Walter Becker was tearing out a riff. There was nothing around me and I felt cooler, like someone had turned on my AC. I reached down and turned it on, feeling the pores tighten on my neck and a shudder rack my body. My great plans to save some money and go straight home went out the window. I needed a drink. The dollar pints of the cheap stuff called me. I went back to Baxter's. Rachel was behind the bar. Her eyes glowed in the cheap yellow lights. Sean asked me out, she gushed while setting a pint in front of me. Bastard. Her tan skin and piercing gray eyes had always mesmerized me. She was mine, not his. I felt my gorge rise as jealousy hit me over the head and pulled my soul out of me. He's so gorgeous. I smiled at her, attempting to be civil in the situation that he replayed in my life continuously. I was always the friend, the guy who could never buy a date even if I had $1,000 cash. Girls would see me withdraw, wrap myself in my life while I began to ignore them. That's my life. I guess my sin would be envy. I was there too late, drank too much, and spent the next day hunched over the toilet, twisted into an emotional knot seeing her face every time I closed mine. Something clicked within me that day, and I looked at myself in the mirror and saw past the acne scars and rolls of fat and made myself a promise. It was over 3 weeks later when I returned to Baxter's. Things were different. I stopped caring about what I could do to get someone to sleep with me. I started with a walk routine for about 30 minutes every night. I found I could sleep a little better. I felt like calls from Sean go unanswered. I didn't need details of the date and the standard physical act that followed it. He knew what he was doing. The black cab dropped from my consciousness as I reworked my diet to try to lose a few pounds. I joined a gym that was open a few hours after I got off work, and I received some help with developing a weightlifting routine. I was on a rest day when I showed up at Baxter's. Deanna was tending bar that night. Her long black hair clamped to the back of her head by a giant hair clip that was leopard spotted. She had streaked it purple, and her Batman knee highs had given her short legs. Attention that they richly deserved. They were gray, the bat logo on their fronts and little capes over their calves. They cracked me up the first time I saw them, and they still brought a smile to my face no matter how crappy my day was. I haven't seen you for a while, she smiled at me. I've been busy. She smiled at me again. Yeah, you've been working out. I can tell. You've lost weight. I couldn't do this forever. I needed a change. I sipped my Blue Moon. No more cheap stuff. Yeah, you heard about Rachel? That name had not been on my mind in a while. No? Is she okay? She's been really quiet for a while. Michael had to talk her out of quitting 3 times this past week, but she wouldn't say why. I haven't seen anything of Sean either. I plucked the orange rind from the rim and dropped it into the glass. They had a date, but I haven't talked to him lately. She is so smitten with him, but she's a small town girl and he's a player. There was nothing but trouble there. Her eyes sparkled from the glare of the TVs and her slightly purple hair blew around her head. Her cheeks were shallow, glistening in the lighting beneath the edge of the bar. The bottles of vodka and empty glasses became miniature lights themselves, scattering the light in the dark corners of the coolers, the dishwasher, and the small fridges. If she was smart, she would have dated you. She winked at me, and I shot her a smile. I wasn't interested anymore. I'd become a work in progress. She's in at 7. Maybe she'll talk to you. I got a game board for one of those TV systems some places have and was trying to boost my pot and poker up to 10,000 imaginary chips when she came in an hour later. She quickly walked behind the bar, dropped off her bag, ignoring the greeting she was getting. Her eyes tore around the bar when she saw me. Her eyes were laced in pain, and I knew that someone had done something really bad to her. Hi. She was reluctant to have eye contact with me. Now I was worried. Hi. Are you okay? She shook her head. A tear wandered down her cheek. She turned away from me, but I gently grabbed her hand. I wasn't giving up on her. What happened? She looked into my baby blues and spilled it. She burst into tears. Her body shook as she let it out. I listened to her intently. Black feelings washed over me, and I was glad I never took any of Sean's calls. I let her go, and she went inside. I sat there for a long moment, trying to figure out what to do. An itch settled into the inside of my head, and I slid off the utilitarian metal stool and looked out into the parking lot. It was there, right on cue. I had been keeping an eye on the paper for the last few weeks. 6 people had disappeared from the area. All of them criminals, all of them bad people. Crime had dropped like social consciousness and shifted, and people had decided to become better to each other. I had done some checking and found the black cab was seen in different places. Detroit, Camden, Los Angeles, where things were at their worst. It suddenly had shown up. There were memes dedicated towards it now, warning people that any social faux pas would usher in the black cab to their neighborhood to clean things up. There were some blurry photographs that perfectly matched what had driven by us that night. Was it a warning from God, like Sodom and Gomorrah? Or was it something else? Sean showed up 30 minutes later. He was already a little drunk and plopped down next to me. Where you been? I've been getting some stuff done. I was trying not to drag him off the stool and start punching him, but I had a better idea. Dude, I went on a date with Rachel. Man, it was fun. He pulled out his cell phone and started showing me pictures. She had been abused in a bad way. He gave me a sick grin. I'm gonna sell these pics to one of those porn sites. Man, she is so hot when she's naked. He grinned. I heard it coming. The soft hum of the engine made the windows vibrate and made my heart stop. Turning to him, I said, "There's something in my car I want to show you." Deanna came around, saw Sean, and walked away. He gave her the finger in response. Rachel walked out the door and froze when she saw him. He spotted her. Grinning, he said, "Hey, baby, want to hang out again?" Next thing I knew, she was on top of him, hitting him with rabbit punches. He fell off the bar stool, smashing his head on the edge of the bar. He caught himself before he hit the floor, his left hand catching himself on the stool next to him, his sense of self-preservation finally awakening. People began shouting and someone came running. I got between them. She was hysterical, and I looked her gently in the eyes and said the most powerful statement I had ever made at that point in my life. I will take care of this. Sean was shouting how he was being assaulted, and I was able to push him out of the gates of the place into the road. You raped her. I said it loud enough for everyone in the bar to hear. Beer glasses stopped halfway to mouths, and I plucked the phone out of his hand and tossed it at Michael, who was standing outside the gate. He looked like he was ready to throw down with the both of us. He looked at it and he stared at Sean. "You bastard, I'm calling 911. Sean looked at me, called me a really bad name, and headed for his car. Then it was on us. It came up behind Sean and the door was open. It was only for a second, but that was all I needed to see. I ran at him and gave him a shove that sent him sailing toward the black cab. Sinatra flooded out into the street as something in black grabbed him. I saw the driver. It was someone I'd seen in my past, but whose name I couldn't remember. His face was red. A smell of burnt hamburger and clicking noises filled my senses. I thought I even saw him grin at me and tip a torn, faded 1940s cab driver hat in my direction. Then the door was closed and it drove away with Sean. Sin was sin, and if he was not meant to be taken by the black cab, it never would have taken him. Michael ran up to me. "Why did you let him escape? I've got the cops on the way." I didn't. They'll never find him. Not in this world. Stunned, he stood there. His face went red, and I stood behind him looking in the direction he was. The black cab rose from the street in a low arc and, like a diver, disappeared into the ground. We almost could feel the ground ripple a little, like it was a diver dropping into a shallow lake or some pool somewhere. Others saw it happen. They had come out from the patio into the road to watch the show. One burly guy who I had seen there before crossed himself, plucking a crucifix from under his shirt. He kissed it with shaking hands, and for a moment, the lights in the parking lot blinked at once. "Chris, your tab is on me tonight." Michael wiped his face with his hand. Like the rest of us, he didn't know what to think. My mind hit a blank wall. I couldn't reconcile what I had seen. Was the fabric between our reality and hell that thin? Could it be pierced that easily? And was it also that thin between us and heaven the same way? I didn't know. Done. I sighed. "If you don't fire Rachel, I'll let you pay it." Done. We walked back to bar. Rachel hugged me, and after a few months, she became my girlfriend. And now she's my fiance. We're moving out of the area now, going back to small town New York. My buddy up in Jersey has been left to business by an uncle he hardly knew, in a little town near the base of the Adirondacks called Wings Falls. He's willing to sell it to me for a cheap price. Turns out Rachel's family's from Gilderland. It's just down the road. I've never seen the black cab again, and I don't want to. So how crazy is it that like people just watch this guy get shoved into a cab because he was that much of a scumbag? I think that's really funny. Yep, exactly. Sigh. Welp. I mean, what else can you say, really? You know? I'm finished with that story, Reaper. What's up? Wansea Entertainment. That's the people that do like the animated horror stories, right? I believe that's who they are. No, I don't do voices for them. The baby. What baby? Yeah. It's Drew. I do call Remy baby from time to time. Oh gosh, it's been so long since I've done that story. I don't even remember how fucked up it is. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's I don't know. There's this whole thing that I just don't like with true scary stories, and that's part of the reason I don't do them is because there's too many people in the horror community or horror narrating community. And I don't have anything against people in the horror narrating community, but the the fact that they read stories from like girls POVs and it's these like deep voiced men always kind of just takes me out of the story immediately. That's part of the reason why I don't do them is because, you know, one, it's the same fucking story over and over again. Somebody like got creeped out like walking down the street, or somebody got like, you know, accosted while trying to go to the gas station or some bullshit. So it's one of those things where like, oh, let's not meet. You know, I don't do that stuff. You guys know me. You guys know I don't do that stuff. No, you cannot voice the 13-year-old girl at all. Let's see. All right. Another water break. Let's do. You know, you guys have been asking for it, so we'll do the first one of this one. All right, so yes, water.
My dad was a detective in the Los Angeles area for over 40 years. He worked right up until the day he died, which was last month. He specialized in interrogating perpetrators, especially the psycho or difficult ones. I was going through his things and found a box of tapes. They were all labeled with case numbers and dates. I think they must be the official recordings of the interviews he conducted. I've been listening to some of them, and they are more disturbing than you can even imagine. I'm going to share one of them with you. Please, only listen if you are able to handle some really fucking creepy shit. My dad's name was Danny. Everything you hear is as it happened. I miss you, Dad.
Good morning, Miss Davis.
Is it morning?
Yes, ma'am. It's exactly 7:45 a.m.
Oh, yes, of course.
Would you like to tell me about what happened?
I can try. Are you recording?
Yes, ma'am. We have to record these interviews.
Oh, my. Well, I don't mind being recorded. I'm used to it, you know. My sister and I, we were child stars, like real ones. We got recognized on the streets all the time. We had tons of fans, got letters and presents. I still have a big white bear one of my fans sent me. I started acting in films when I was 6. My sister was only 4. I guess you could say our parents were show parents. Looking back, I think they were trying to live through us. They never got to be stars, so we were like their little substitutes. I don't have too many memories of that time in my life. I was very young after all, but I do remember spending hours in hair and makeup. I was pretty well behaved as a child, I think. I tolerated the fake eyelashes and outfits. My little sister, Missy, was less well behaved. She was always crying and squirming around. But once that camera turned on, we were both perfect. I don't act anymore. As you probably know, most child stars don't have film careers as adults. Once we stopped being cute, the industry didn't want us anymore. For me, it was the age of 18. No one was interested in my talent after that. I can't lie, I was pretty sad. I loved being pampered and treated like a supermodel. Missy, on the other hand, hated the limelight. She was so happy when we stopped acting. Anyway, I lived with Missy in our childhood home. Our parents died when we were 22. They left us quite a bit of money, so I don't work. Missy is in school for social work. She's always been such a sweet soul. She's going to help so many people with her degree. Oh, I'm getting off topic. I now have a little girl of my own. She's 4.5. Her name is Lissy. She is so stunningly beautiful. I really want to get her involved in acting, but Missy doesn't think it's a good idea. She reminds me how difficult our childhoods were, but I think it was good for us. It taught us how to be outgoing and patient. Lissy is a bit of a handful. She cries a lot and whines. Missy says it's normal, but I think she needs a little structure in her life. And the life of a child star is definitely structured. You wake up, get ready for the shoot, spend all day on camera, and then finally go back to sleep. Missy and I barely had time for ourselves and hardly ever went to school. Missy wanted to go, but our parents were very strict about our filming schedules. Wow, I am such a space case. I totally forgot your question.
Don't worry, ma'am. I asked, what happened last night?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I've always been so forgetful. Anyway, last night Lissy and I were watching some of Missy and my old movies. I told Lissy all about how her aunt and I were child stars, and she seemed really interested in seeing the videos. I mean, what little girl doesn't want to be famous? I decided to show her our most popular film, which was the first one we ever made. I think it was so popular because we were brand new on the scene and people were amazed by our talents.
Are you saying you showed your daughter your movies?
Of course. Doesn't every star show their children their movies? Anyway, Lissy and I were watching and she giggled the whole time. The film was pretty simple, so she could understand what was happening. It was an easy shoot. It was just us girls in the bathtub. We played with the bubbles and laughed a lot. Then we got out of the tub and our dad dried us off. It's called Sissy and Missy Have Bath Time. Once the video ended, Lissy wanted more, so I played her a few more. She liked the ones with us alone the best, although I showed her some of the films we made with co-stars. She didn't like those as much. It was probably because Missy had a few crying scenes in those. We watched Sissy and Missy get in trouble, and Sissy and Missy play dress-up, and a few others. So then Missy walks in on us watching the movie with Mr. Friendly.
Mr. Friendly?
Oh yeah, Mr. Friendly was one of Dad's friends. He was very nice to us. After the shoot, we got lots of candy and stayed up all night. I guess Missy didn't like him very much because she ran into the room while we were watching and started screaming. She said, "What the fuck are you doing?" I told her the truth. I swear I did. I said Lissy wanted to see our movies. Missy looked furious. She kept yelling, "I thought you said you destroyed these tapes."
We thought those films were destroyed as well, after the trial.
They got rid of the tapes they found, but Mom and Dad had a whole stack of duplicates under the floorboards. I kept them because I hated to think of my childhood acting career being destroyed.
Okay, ma'am. So what happened next?
Well, Missy kept screaming at me. She yelled and threw things. She threatened to take away Lissy. She said I wasn't a good mom. She said I was just like our mother, which is ridiculous. I couldn't believe she said those things. I am a great mom. I just want my daughter to feel like a star too. So I turned her upside down.
What does it mean to turn someone upside down?
Oh, silly me. I forget that not everyone knows that term. It's an acting term. When an actress isn't performing right, our parents would turn her upside down. We had lots of sisters who became upside down. They still live with us. It's just now they live in the garden.
But how do you turn someone upside down?
You stabbed them.
So are you saying you killed your sister?
She was going to take away my baby girl. I made her upside down. She can sleep in the garden with the rest of them. She never understood how important it was to be a star. She deserved it. I am a good mom.
Is there anything else you'd like to tell me?
You know, you look a lot like Mr. Friendly. You're handsome. I bet you make a good actor. Have you thought about acting?
No, ma'am.
Well, you should think about it. My daughter's getting into acting, you know. You two could make a great movie.
That story is always so messed up. But it's also so good because it's so messed up. I don't know. Okay, let's see here. All right. No. None of that. All right. Let me see. All right. Next up is Waking Nightmares. Feel free to read with me as I read aloud. Focus on your breathing. Silence your mind. Drink warm milk. Stay away from electronics. Keep the room dark. Take pills. All the ways the internet has told me to fall asleep. All bullshit. For most everyone else, sleep is simple. Really just lie down and suddenly 8 hours have passed away. Those people don't need to worry about what happens if they can't fall asleep. Not like me. Our entire existence boils down to the constant string of thought weaving its way through our heads. Our thoughts are what we are. But when you're left all alone with those thoughts for hours and hours, cut off from all external stimuli, that ever-present tiny little voice becomes something like torture. Very much like torture. In fact, I likened it to Chinese water torture. The practice of tying someone up and having a drop of water fall on their head at fixed intervals. Drip, drip, drip. It becomes a certainty. All that they can really focus on is the next drop of water. That's what it was like when I could try to sleep. One thought, and then another, and another, and another, never letting my mind rest. It had been like that for as long as I could remember. Even as a little child, I would lie awake in bed silently conversing with my stuffed animals. As I grew older, however, my insomnia became more of an issue. It held much more weight in my life than my old conversations with Mr. Teddy Bear. Of course, there were the obvious side effects. I lived like a zombie, only half in touch with the world. My mind, in its ceaseless need to think, jumped around, never able to focus on one thought. I was honestly fine with that part. The part I was not fine with were the things that stood in the corner of my bedroom when I couldn't sleep. People who sleep normally sometimes experience nightmares. Their own sleeping minds work against them to create terrifying situations. Monsters, spiders, murderers, there are no limits. The thing is, though, what those people wake up and their nightmares are gone. But my nightmares were real, physical things. They were different every time. I've had the typical fears, giant spiders, clowns, chainsaw murderers, and such, but every now and then I got creatures, horrid abominations that were particularly unpleasant. They had ways beyond my understanding of keeping my room dark, of preventing lights from working, so I never got to make out more of their images than the moonlight would allow. The occurrences, my own twisted version of nightmares, had been happening ever since I moved into my own apartment. Nightmares are generally a result of stress, so my theory is that the stress of moving out on my own caused these nightmares. But somewhere along the line, something went wrong. My nightmares were not confined to my head. I didn't know why, I just knew that they were very real. The memory of the first time it ever happened is permanently engraved into my mind. How could I forget? It was the first week in my new apartment. I hadn't even unpacked, and I was swamped with work from my new desk job, accounting. All of the stress led to another of the all-so-familiar sleepless nights. But it was distinctly different. Rather than tossing and turning, I found myself to be lying quite still under my thin covers, unable to focus on anything other than my newfound headache. Headache is probably not the best way to put it. Hammering migraine is a better term. Pulsating waves of pain radiated from my skull. Even the soft touch of my pillow was enough to set my teeth on edge. I had let out a groan of agony, and that seemed to be the start of it all. A crackling chuckle, similar to that of a smoker, raspy and dry, came out of the darkness in my room, responding to my pain. And just like that, my headache was gone. But it was replaced with a skin-chilling fear that led me to sit bolt upright. The chuckle continued. It came from that far corner, and I very much knew that I was not alone in my bedroom. It had been a cloudy night, so all I could do was squint into the darkness. Eventually, my eyes managed to make out the dark outline. It was a person, sort of. I could make out two struts of curly hair shooting off of the side of a bald head, all topped with a very tiny top hat. I didn't need to turn on my bedside lamp, which I was far too afraid to do regardless, to know that it was a clown. There had been a clown standing in the corner of my room, chuckling continuously. Hours went by as I watched him, but he never moved, and he never stopped that damn laugh. I hadn't slept much around that time, perhaps as little as 4 hours of sleep in the previous 48 hours, and that lack of sleep is what nearly got me killed. My thoughts were numb and out of focus, which is why at some point in the night I managed to write off the clown silhouette in the corner as a fatigue-induced hallucination. With that conclusion easing my mind, it had been easy to eventually slip off into sleep. That sleep was short-lived. I was forced to wake by a pair of gloved hands around my throat, and all I could manage to do was flail my arms around, doing absolutely nothing to remove the weight from my windpipe. My entire body burned, desperate for air, and I felt that I was not going to see the morning until a dim light briefly illuminated my window. It was a lone car, a solitary set of headlights driving past in the night. It saved my life. For the briefest of moments, I could see the face of my assailant, all the paint of a clown with none of the charm. The entirety of his flesh was white as a sheet, completely contrasting the horrid splash of red around his mouth. Blood or paint, it was still disgusting. The eyes were the worst part, though. The cold pupils were almost impossible to make out under the murky layer of darkness covering the surface. But I could still tell they were looking directly at me as he crushed my throat. But the moment I saw him, in the flash of headlights, his grip released. All I could do was stare and try to suck in narrow breaths as the clown climbed off my bed and backed into his corner. Shakily, I sat up, never looking away from the clown, and I reached over to flick on my bedside lamp. The room remained dark. I hit the switch again and again, but the room remained dark. The clown once more began to chuckle. There was no way in hell that I could bring myself to move, to run, to call the police. All I did was sit and stare, and I could feel the clown stare back. It wasn't until the sun shone through my window that the clown disappeared. I just blinked and he was gone. I didn't want to acknowledge it as real. I just wanted to dismiss it for what it was, a nightmare, but the bruises on my neck would not allow me to do no such thing. Yet if I went to a doctor, I'd certainly be labeled insane, not to mention that if I called in sick so early in my career, I'd lose my job. So I went into work, made up some tale of getting jumped by a vagrant to explain the bruises, and tried to get on with my life. Which was very difficult considering I was met by a different creature the following night. A large spider. And the night after that, a machete murder. And so on. Which is what led me to begin drinking. My first visit to the local bar was 2 weeks after the first visitor. The only sleep I'd had in that time period were the few minutes at a time I was able to get away with at work and 40 minutes during lunch. Of course, at first, I didn't take it lying down. No technology would work when they were present, and they only appeared during night hours. But I never had time to sleep during the day, and I thought of everything a sensible person would think of. I thought about moving, about trying to sleep other places. A visit to a hotel yielded negative results. Getting an exorcism, and even briefly about ending my life. Yeah. Those weeks were hell, and I was quickly losing motivation to push on. But my first night of trying to drink the trouble away, almost as soon as I entered the bar, I became a cliche. I fell in love. The bartender, a soft-spoken, lanky brunette, Kathleen, was the most attractive woman I'd ever seen. So, of course, I made a fool of myself trying to talk with her. I was sleep-deprived and drunk, yet for some reason she took on an immediate liking to me. She was quick to laugh at my poor jokes and didn't seem off-put at all by the excessive complaining I did about my job. Even drunk, I managed to avoid bringing up my nighttime companions. Although, by the end of the first night with her, I felt as if I could trust her with that knowledge. But I held off. Probably a good thing I did, too, seeing as how she asked for my phone number before I left the bar. That night was the first time I'd been happy in weeks. I'd almost let myself believe all of my problems had gone away. A pretty girl and a stomach full of beer was all it took for me to let my guard down. And I paid for it. That night, I climbed in my bedside chair. No intention of sleep. I let my guard down, but I had no way allowed myself to forget the creatures in the night. Even if I didn't mean to sleep, it became quite difficult to focus on staying awake when my mind wandered to thoughts of Kathleen. Minutes, maybe hours passed as I replayed our conversation. I'm not a witty person when I'm sober. I'm even less witty while drunk. The last thought I had before losing the battle with my eyelids was that she must have been twice as drunk as I to be laughing at my jokes. Searing pain in my legs woke me up screaming. The normal light of my window was blocked by a hazy figure, tall with jagged arms that bent in too many places, and the entirety of its skin writhed with needle-like protrusions. I figured that part out because they were being used to shred the skin on my legs. Not ashamed to admit that I screamed bloody murder. Didn't deter the nightmare at all, by the way. Just leaned further over me and reached towards my face with razored tendril. The movement was slow and mocking. It was drawing out the anticipated pain. I was so focused on that one tendril, it almost drowned out the pain in my legs. The creature slowly drew closer, and it towered over me as it finally connected with my cheek. There was only a pinprick of pain. The moment the monster touched my face, my phone buzzed and lit up. Once I could see it, and its entire horrifying figure, the nightmare receded to its spot in the corner. My floor was soaked with the blood seeping from my legs and probably in urine as well, but all I could think to do was grab at the phone. I didn't understand at the time. Normally nothing electronic worked when the nightmares were watching me. Yet the phone lit up, and when I hit the button, and in the screen flashed a text from Kathleen. Sorry to text you so late. I couldn't sleep. I know you're probably in bed, but I just couldn't wait to ask if you'd like to have dinner sometime. I called her. I was completely incoherent, sobbing and raving. I told her about the monsters in my room, the cuts on my legs, and how she just saved my life. All at 2 in the morning, the night after I met her. But she didn't hang up. She listened, and bless her perfect heart, she asked, "Where do you live? I'll come over." I told her to let herself in, and when she arrived, I don't think she expected me to actually have torn up legs. There was a lot of freaking out and rushing around. I imagine I lost a lot of blood, which is why it all seemed so hazy, but I know that Kathleen forced me to go to the hospital. Or rather, she called an ambulance without consulting me, but I'm glad she did. I woke up in the hospital to her smiling face. I was so confused. Where am I? The hospital? You've been asleep for 2 days. Asleep? The word sounded so strange coming out of my mouth. Sleep was something for normal people. A fairy tale far beyond my grasp. Sleep was something that came in 15-minute flashes here and there, never in hours. Yes, asleep. They're still trying to figure out what happened to you. They think some psycho broke into your apartment, but I'm glad you're okay. I've been here with you the whole time. Why? Far from the best choice of words to show gratitude. Why are you being so nice to me? Kathleen gave a tight grin in response. You just seem so lost. When I first saw you, it was like you were calling out to me for help. I don't really understand either, but I already feel so connected to you. Oh, was all I replied. But in my defense, I was still groggy. Thank you so much. We were quiet for a while until she softly asked, Hey, when you called me, you said I saved your life. What do you mean? The memory of the creature flashed through my mind, and I must have grimaced. She glanced down at my cuts. You weren't planning on killing on suicide, were you? Did you do that to yourself? Oh, no. It's worse than that, I responded. It's just, I have nightmares. For some reason, she didn't question that. Well, you're in no condition to be on your own. How about I spend the night with you and try to get rid of those bad dreams, she offered, and then seemed to understand what she had just said. Whoa, I mean, just be there. Nothing sexual. No, I cut her off. The thought of how she might react to the monsters or how they might react to her, I wouldn't have it. You've done so much, and I still don't understand why, to be completely honest, but I don't want you to get hurt by this. She placed her hand on my cheek, opposite to where the nightmare had prodded me. I'm doing so much for you because your eyes are the saddest I've ever seen. Whatever it is you're facing, it's time to stop trying on your own. I'm coming to your place once you get out of here. There was no arguing beyond that. The cuts on my legs were many, but not deep. So I was actually able to walk out of there on my own 2 feet, with Kathleen refusing to let go of my arm. We made it back to my apartment, and I insisted upon cooking for her. Then we simply sat at my little kitchen table and talked. We made small talk about everything and anything, yet there wasn't a single subject in which we had opposing views. She was the perfect girl, which is why it was so difficult for me to ask her to leave. Our conversation had been effortless and warm, but I shattered the mood. I need you to leave now. It's getting late and you shouldn't be here overnight. She ignored the request. Time for the meat of the matter. So what are these nightmares that would compel you to turn away a pretty lady offering to spend the night? I suppose I just didn't want her to leave, so I figured screw it and tried telling the truth. They're not really nightmares. They're monsters. I know I sound crazy, and I probably am, but for the last few weeks, I haven't been sleeping. There have been these things in my room at night, watching me, waiting for me to stop watching them. If I look away, they come for me. I was almost strangled, now my legs. You're not lying, are you? Her question wasn't patronizing in the slightest. She genuinely believed me, which led me to believe that perhaps I wasn't the crazy one. But I no longer had the strength or desire to refuse her as she said, Let's go to your bed. We'll face them together. A few minutes later, and we were doing something that few adults had ever done before. Sitting in bed with a stranger that they just met at a bar, yet doing absolutely nothing other than going to sleep. I made sure to leave every light in the room on, and Kathleen didn't seem to mind. Not like it mattered, though. As soon as we both settled down under the covers, the lights flicked off on their own. Her breath caught at the same time as mine. The two of us slowly sat back upright in the dark room, and I had the unshakable feeling that I should not have allowed Kathleen to stay. My voice was a hoarse whisper. They control the lights. They don't let me see them. She remained silent, and I followed suit as it became clear that we were not the only ones in the room. An all too familiar rasping arose from the far corner. My first waking nightmare. The clown. She could see it too. Kathleen's voice was faint even though she sat so close. When did this start? When I moved in here and got a new job, I replied dimly. My blood ran cold as the clown let out its humorless chuckle, and my mind ran rampant with newly formed fears. It was one thing for me to face the monsters. At least they ignored me when I focused on them. But what if the clown attacked Kathleen? There are more, she pointed out. I kept my eyes plastered on the darkness of the room, and dim moonlight leaking through the shades illuminated the awful fact that Kathleen was correct. More creatures lined the walls of the room, surrounding the bed, all staring at the two human occupants. What actually happened to your legs? She asked faintly. I was too absorbed in our surroundings to realize the oddity of the question. I fell asleep. One of them got to me. And with a sinking realization, I saw the very same buzzing outline of the needle creature that had torn apart my flesh. But Kathleen continued to press on. What stopped it? You messaged me. And you said one of them tried to strangle you. What stopped that one? Someone's headlights, I responded numbly as my eyes further adjusted to the darkness and revealed the 4-foot tarantula clinging to one of the walls. More of the creatures appeared with every second, and all I could think about was the horrible things they would do to Kathleen if I didn't keep my eyes on them. Then one of them took a step forward. I whipped my head towards it, the machete murderer, but when I faced it, one of the other creatures drew closer. I couldn't watch all of them. Somehow Kathleen managed to keep talking. They started when you had a big change in your life, and human interaction made them go away. We need to make a run for it, I had replied, only half listening to her as the mob of nightmares closed in on the bed. There's never been more than one. I looked to my right, and the spider was no longer on the wall, but on the ceiling overhead, and when I looked back down, the needle monster was almost within arm's reach. No matter which way I turned, they managed to draw in closer. The clown stood at the head of the mattress, staring at both of us head on. All I could manage to do was whimper. You go. Maybe they just want me. She cut me off with a kiss. Her entire body weight flung against mine and pinned me against the pillows. My mind was a panic. I couldn't see a single nightmare. So I figured they must be about to pounce, but still she pressed against me, and I guess I also kissed back. Might as well enjoy our last moments, but nothing happened. She broke away, and we both drew in breath. And then I gasped as I saw the empty bedroom around us. The lights flickered on as she rolled back to her side of the bed. How? You told me yourself, she replied with a relieved giggle. Interaction makes them go away. Be it a stranger driving by, or someone texting you in the middle of the night, or maybe the most intense kiss of my life. They're gone. That's all I could think, and then, how are you so amazing? I'm not. I'm really not. I get lonely. I do stupid things like call crazy drunks I just met, and I work in a bar to make a living. I'm anything but perfect. The monsters were gone, and I got the impression they weren't coming back. Not as long as Kathleen was with me. Now it was my turn to kiss her, and when it was over, I said, well, you're perfect to me. She just grinned and curled up under the covers, somehow ready to go to sleep. Come on, you need some sleep. And for the first time in weeks, I was able to let my head sink to my pillow without worry. The end to a horrid chapter in my life, all thanks to the amazing bartender at my side. She was my hero, and I had to find a way to put it into words. I needed to express my true gratitude, and it took a while, but I got it. I wrapped my arm around her and said, "You're a dream come true." Oh, that was cute. I mean, it was fucked up, but it was cute. Wow. All right. Water break.
Everyone seems really interested in Dad's tapes. I guess that's good. His work gets to sort of live on. But it's also a little creepy that you guys are so interested in these psychos. I mean, you seem almost as interested as Dad was. He talked about the perps all the time. I think it followed him home from work a lot. Anyway, here's another tape. If you want to listen to the first one, it's here. Also, just a reminder that my dad's name is Danny, and that's what I call him. Well, sorry, my dad's name was Danny.
Dirk,
Yeah,
are you feeling alright?
man, just tired. I can't sleep in this place.
Yeah, I understand that. Do you feel you'll be able to talk to me?
Sure, but you won't believe me.
Try me.
It's just, I haven't been able to talk to anyone except Meg about this, especially not my family, obviously.
How about we start there? What is your family life like?
I don't know. My life's always been kind of below average. My parents were both college grads, but I didn't make it past freshman year.
What else?
I guess I was kind of a jerk in high school. I dated around a lot and messed with some of the younger kids. I got myself together a bit once my parents kicked me out of the house. I'm not mad at them for it. I needed that push, you know? I started working as a bartender, and that's where I've been for forever, it seems. Same town, same bar, same life. Ha! I guess it has its benefits, though.
Yeah? Like what?
The nice thing about Mickey's, sorry, that's the bar I work at. The good thing is that it's between two major roads, so we get a lot of travelers in. A lot of out-of-towners staying overnight. That means a lot of new faces and always new women to meet. I wouldn't call myself handsome. Hell, you can see that. But I can definitely charm a girl into bed. Well, not all girls. Not Meg.
Who's Meg?
Meg is this leggy brunette who just moved out of her parents' place. She was just barely 18 when she dropped into the bar. She's a small town pretty, you know the kind, boring face, not really any ass, but her rack was nice and she knew how to wear a dress. Oh, man, I'm sorry, man, I'm kind of vulgar.
I've heard worse. Anyway, please go on.
Well, I chatted Meg up every night she came in, but she never went home with me. We'd be talking until closing time, me urging her back to my place. But she always flirtatiously declined, and that was that. I may not be the best guy, but I am definitely not some rapist. Anyway, a week after Meg started coming in, I met this chick. Fuck, what's her name?
Anne? Anne Cirilli?
Yeah, that sounds right. Anne. She was a typical traveler on her way to a business trip. She stopped into the bar for a drink, and I certainly admired the way she filled out her little pantsuit. We flirted all night, and then I took her home. I promise you, everything was totally normal for the most part. We talked more at my apartment, we made out a little, and then it was time for the real event. This is gonna get graphic. But hey, I warned you. So yeah, I was just inside her when all of a sudden she started screaming, "Don't put your dick in crazy!" I immediately pull out. I was totally caught off guard. I said, "What the fuck?" She was just lying on the bed confused. She asked what was wrong. I told her what she said, and she laughed and said I must have been hearing things. I guess I shrugged it off because we started making out again. I got hard and was back inside of her. She started screaming again, "Don't put your dick in crazy! Don't put your dick in crazy!" I pull out again, and she's looking at me still confused. I think, fuck it. Maybe she has a weird kink or something, so I decided to just go with it. We start fucking again, and she just keeps screaming, "Don't put your dick in crazy!" I try to ignore it, but then it gets really weird. Her face starts to get, contoured, I guess. Like she tasted something sour, but it was affecting her entire face. Then her neck starts to turn, and I swear to God, she turned her head almost all the way around. This is going to sound strange, but I couldn't stop. It was the best damn orgasm I ever had. She was looking weirder and weirder, screaming the whole time, "Don't put your dick in crazy," but I was coming fucking hard, man. I finished finally and must have passed out because I woke up and she was gone.
You didn't see her leave?
Nope. I asked Meg about it, and she laughed at me. She said either Anne was a nutjob or I was going insane. I kind of joked about inviting her up to my apartment and seeing which one was true, but she said no like she always did. But, that wasn't the end. The same thing happened to the next 3 girls.
Next 4.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna let some crazy bitch ruin my sex life. Plus, I don't know why, but I felt extra horny all the time. Every woman I saw was incredibly hot to me, even if she wasn't my type. Like the next girl I took home, her name was,
Miranda?
No, that was the one after that. I think this next girl was named Susie. Anyway, she was not a chick you'd think of as hot. She was thin, but had this weird bulging stomach, like she was pregnant almost. Her hair was kind of ratty, and she was just looking dirty, but I was horny and she was ready to go, so I took her home. She didn't even want to make out. I think she was just grateful for any male attention, so we get to fucking right away, and just like Anne, she starts screaming, "Don't put your dick in crazy!" I pull out fucking shocked. She looks at me weird, just like Anne. She said she didn't say anything. She said I must be imagining it. And fuck, I was so horny, I went back inside her. She was turned away from me again, towards the wall. I tried to push her head into the pillow so I wouldn't hear her yelling, "Don't put your dick in crazy," but she was loud as fuck. And her body, the huge bulge in her stomach started moving. It moved to her back and then up to her neck. It was pulsing like something was pushing inside of it. Then her head snaps back and her spine twists up towards me, all the while she's screaming, "Don't put your dick in crazy." I guess I passed out again after I finished. She was gone when I woke up.
Don't put your dick in crazy. Does that phrase have any meaning to you?
I know my high school friends and I used to use that phrase all the time, jokingly, especially about ex-girlfriends. It's like, so many women are just like nut jobs. If you fuck those chicks, you're just stuck with the crazy forever. But none of these girls seemed like that. They were just normal bar chicks. But every girl I had sex with did the same thing. The yelling, the weird body shit, and then me waking up and they were gone. Anne, Susie, Miranda, Cal, Carrie, and whatever the last chick's name was. She was a hooker, so I doubt Candy was her real name.
Candy was the sex worker, right?
Yeah, she was my last hope, sort of. Meg actually suggested it. I told her the insane stories of these girls, and she said I was definitely going crazy. But there's only one way to know for sure, She said that I should hire a prostitute and pay her to say nothing during sex. And if she yells, then I know I'm insane.
So, it was Meg who introduced you to Candy?
Yeah, but Candy was the worst one of all. The second I entered, her skin started dripping off. It felt like paint sloping off her body. Turned to dark red and then smeared onto my bed. Got all over my body, but I couldn't stop. I just watched as she decomposed right in front of me, man. And of course, the whole time she was screaming, "Don't put your dick in crazy, don't put your dick in crazy." Eventually, I was fucking a bare skeleton. I swear to God, she had melted right in front of me. Man, I just wanted it to be over.
When did the police show up?
Right before I, finished. It was mortifying. The police stared at me with their guns out while I was coming into this disgusting skeleton. I finished, but then this time I didn't pass out.
Do you remember what happened after that?
Kind of. I remember one of the cops handcuffing me. They wouldn't even let me grab my clothes. I remember being put in this room, but I don't know why I'm being held here. I didn't do anything wrong. It was these crazy women, I swear. They are the ones who were screaming, "Don't put your dick in crazy." I didn't tell them to. They said I did something to them. They're lying. Ask Meg. Please, ask her.
Dirk.
Just ask Meg.
I did some digging after I listened to this story. Turns out Dirk was a real scumbag. He killed 5 women in the span of 3 months. They were all travelers, so no one even knew where to look for them or that they were missing. He was only caught because he dug up an ex-girlfriend who had killed herself in high school. He was trying to have sex with her dead body. Well, whatever's left after 5+ years. Her name was Megan Woolley. My dad put up with some sick people. I don't know how he got through it alive. Well, I guess he didn't.
The dad, I keep forgetting how good and fucked up Dad's tapes are, but yeah. All right, so this one coming up is the last one for the night. For reasons I cannot share the story with you guys, like the link, but I will read it to you, and you can just listen to the last story for the day. And I hope everyone is having a good day. And we're going to end off with a story called Red Ribbon. The leaves crunch beneath my hiking boots. In the silence of the forest, the noise is almost deafening. I could hear a pin drop if I had a pin with me amongst all these trees, but I don't. There's nothing sharp for miles around. Believe me, I've made sure of it. All I have are the clothes on my back, the thick strap of my backpack cutting into my bare shoulders. It isn't hot here, not yet. I've started early enough in the morning that the sweltering midsummer heat won't get to me yet, but hopefully by the time it breaks through the trees, I'll be deep enough into the forest where the tallest pines grow that I'll be protected by their comforting cool shade. Until then, I put one foot in front of the other. Crunch, crunch, crunch. I designed it this way, to be so completely isolated. I needed to be alone. Needed to get away from, well, everything. Needed time to think. While isolation may be trivial to some, I can basically count on my hand the number of times I've ever been alone. Ever. I'm one of 5 in my family, and my whole childhood, my whole life has been nothing but non-stop chatter from everyone around me. Being the middle child never helped either. I'm not sure how much anyone ever paid attention to me, or listened, or cared. But now, I'm going to be the center of my own world. I can think, move, breathe without someone else interrupting or forcing a thought into my head. Without my consent. I planned to hike 3 miles deep into the forest, making sure to leave markers on the trail as I did so. That way I didn't get lost. I've been wrapping ribbons around trees as I go too, just to make sure. I dyed the ribbons red with leftover dye I found in a dusty, unused corner of my apartment in the city. Dye I had initially bought for some abandoned pet project I thought might be my new career. I've always done things like that for as long as I can remember. Picking up hobbies, hoping they turn into real work. I would quickly get bored, or worse yet, realize I was never even good at the thing I was trying to do in the first place. I was always disappointing my parents. The most disappointing of all my siblings, in fact. Hank, Sally, Truman, Wendy, Robbie. They all had so much more to offer than I ever did. But then again, maybe they made sure of it. Made sure I was the failure so they could shine. Better not think about that now. Not yet. Right now, I need to stay focused on maintaining a rhythm. A pace for how many steps I go to how many red ribbons I wrap around trees. On the 5th tree, I stop to admire my handiwork, see the slippery, silky ribbon pulled tight around the wooden trunk like a dark ruby necklace stretched across a fine lady's neck, or the line of blood trickling horizontally across someone's skin after the throat's been cut. The image makes me shiver. I keep walking. I think briefly about the idea of getting lost so that no one ever found me. Girl with troubled past disappears in the woods, never to be found again. I laugh at the headline. That would really be something, I think to myself. Come all the way out here just to get lost in the woods. No, that wasn't my plan. I came here to be found. Just focus on the steps in front of you, Amy. The wind at the nape of your neck, the trees moving in the sunlight. I don't know this forest well, only remember it faintly from a memory long ago. My class took a field trip into these very woods. It's how I even know that they were here. I'm replicating what we did then with what I was doing now. Hike 3 miles into the forest, spend the night, hike back. I don't know why we did it back then. My school was very focused on the outdoors that way. They were always wanting us to get outside, come out of our shells. I wish it worked on me, but if anything, it made me retreat further into mine. On this particular trip, our teacher focused on survival skills. Taught us how to find naturally occurring ibuprofen and filter out the river water with dark gray charcoal. We slept under crinkly tarps beneath the bright stars and the deep blue-black skies, and in the morning ate dried food out of hollowed-out coconut shells. Our teacher, and I guess by extension our school itself, wanted to teach us about real life, what it meant to have true grit, how to be Lewis and Clark back when there were no planes or trains or automobiles. But now that I think about it, it wasn't very realistic. At least there was nothing truly dangerous about what we were doing out there. We were only 12 and there were cheaper chaperones everywhere. Which was why it never made sense to anyone who told the story later how Jackson got lost. We had a boy in our class, quiet, read a lot. His name was Jackson. I sort of liked him, sensed something in him that I had in me. A feeling of loneliness, of quiet desperation, like he was asking for someone, anyone, to pay attention to him. Sometimes he picked fights with other kids in school. I heard several stories that Jackson ran away from home often as a little kid. Sometimes I heard that his dad beat him, but I didn't know if that was just gossip passed around the lips of nosy middle schoolers with too much free time for their minds to wander into murky corners. It was a dark rumor to be spreading around for a bunch of 12-year-olds, I must admit. He never had any bruises that I could see, but I find sometimes the deepest bruises are the ones you can never see with the naked eye. Those are the ones that hurt the most and last the longest after the final blow is felt. Before anyone realized he was missing, before the chaperones raised the alarms, and we huddled up in a circle and gave our alibis, I saw Jackson. I guess, if you think about it that way, I was the last person to have seen him alive. I've been playing by myself at the sharp rocks at the bottom of the waterfall several yards from our campsite. I planned on collecting all the pretty stones I could find, the ones that were blue and purple in certain lights, the ones that reminded me of sea glass and gemstones. I was going to keep them and bring them home with me and have something that none of my sisters and brothers could have. I remember cradling one particular gemstone in my hand. It was iridescent in the soft afternoon light. Then a shadow crossed my palm, and I looked up. It was right then that I saw Jackson standing on a ledge. He was just staring at me, his face solemn. I could tell his face was wet, but I couldn't tell if it was from the spray from the waterfall or something else. Years later, I would always wonder if he was crying or not. He seemed so sad back then, but I didn't think about any of that right at that moment. Instead, I just waved at him. But if I was expecting anything from him, I was sorely mistaken. He didn't wave back. He didn't do nothing. He just stared at me and kept staring until a shiver ran down my spine and I got up angry. Angry that such a kid thought he could make me feel weird by just staring. After the chaperones realized he was gone, they rounded up my crying classmates and shepherded us back to the beginning of the trail so we could finally call the police to have someone come look for him. They would look for 5 days before calling off the search. The forest was just too big and he would have run out of food by then. I never told anyone I was the last to see him because what good would that do? Jackson was already long gone. Later, when we were assigned to speak with the school psychologist just to make sure we weren't scarred too much by Jackson's death, kids in my class would say that his disappearance was one of the saddest moments of their young adult lives. That it was the first time they came across death or true sadness and loss. They often said that forever that trip would be marked by this horrible tragedy. I said as much when it was my turn to talk to the psychologist. She looked at me sympathetically when I told her I wasn't sleeping well and had nightmares about Jackson. Then she handed me a Jolly Rancher and asked me to bring in the next kid. That was so long ago now. I wonder why my most vivid memory from that afternoon was not the words coming out of my mouth, but rather the sickly sweet taste of the red Jolly Rancher as it rolled around my tongue. If I were to really be honest here, and I guess I consider this now as ever a time to be honest, I look back on that trip as one of the happiest of my childhood because for once in my small little life, I was finally away from my family. Finally got to taste and feel what my thoughts were without one of them yammering in my ear or shoving something down my throat. Sure, we all went to the same school, but thankfully none of us were the same age. And so those 3 days, they were all mine. Missing Jackson and all. Shoot. How many trees have I passed? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll just put one here. Oh God, I feel lightheaded. Oh, I need to sit down. Remember why you are here. Remember. It's because you killed your family. I didn't mean to, I swear. Oh, great. Now I'm talking to the trees. But I'm not, right? The trees can't hear me. What's the old saying? If a tree breaks in the forest? No, that's not right. If a tree collapses? No. What's the word? If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to see it, does it even make a sound? Yeah, that's right. Oh, got it. I'm not totally crazy, right? But the thing is, I'm here in the forest and I can hear the trees, and the trees can hear me. They're hearing me, what I'm saying, what I'm admitting to you right now in the deep, dark silence. They can hear it. Will they tell anyone? I guess at this point you're wondering if I have the ability to explain my descent into whatever drove me to do it? Insanity? Craziness? Are those the words? Or am I too far gone to really explain the situation? I can give you reasons, and they would probably be right if you asked a psychologist specializing in the murder of your entire family. I'm sure there are a few specialists out there, however gruesome it may seem. They'd explain, pinpoint something about me being a middle child. I killed my family in cold blood. I did. I did the thing you never think of doing. Never dream of doing in a million years. They're my family, they say. Family. What a funny word. It never really meant anything to me. It was a synonym for nuisance rather than love. For judgment rather than acceptance. Family meant your father yelled at your mother and your brothers stuck bugs so far down your ears while you slept you had to be rushed to the ER to get them out. Family meant your sister stole your prom dress and spilled grape juice down the front of it the moment your date rang the doorbell. Family meant comparison, competition, never being yourself. One entity, one person in charge of their own destiny. Family meant someone was always getting in the way. I told you, I never was alone. They were always there. Even as I got older, went to college, moved into my own apartment, tried to get away, they were always dropping by. Always wondering why I never made much out of my life, never followed in any of their footsteps, never applied myself. So I snapped. I'm not saying it was good. I'm not saying I agree with why I did it either. I'm only telling you the thinking that went into it the moment I made a rash decision and then had to carry it through. You know how I said I was being honest? Well, I lied about that. I lied about something else too. I told you the ribbons were dyed with paint, but that isn't true. Not true at all. If you really want to know, I'll tell you. The ribbons were dyed with blood. I know it wasn't right. That's why I'm telling all of this now. As if admittance any sort of trade for the lives I stole from them. But they stole mine, right? Or have I been wrong my whole life? Read things the wrong way, alienating myself when they were only trying to help, trying to love me. I guess I'll never know. I don't know why that frightens me the most. I lied about something else too. Jackson? I know where he is, where his bones are buried. It's because I buried him. All those years ago. Jackson was a bully. Did he deserve to die? I don't know. But he bullied me, made me feel small. Small like the other kids made him. When I saw him on the rock and how he didn't wave back, I got angry. Very angry. He angered me with his silence, just like my family angered me with their noise. So I stood up and went over to him and wrapped my fingers around his neck. That was the beginning of it, of an anger I couldn't control. I thought I would never do it again, but here we are, all those years later. And I'm admitting it to you now. By the time you're listening to this, I should be dead. The ribbons having led you to my corpse in the middle of the national forest, my hand clutching the very recorder I'm speaking these words into. The tape probably stopped by the time you've reached me. Jackson's buried a few feet to my left. I hope his family may now find peace. I know I will. I told you before I didn't come here to get lost in this forest. No. I came here to be found. Now come find me. What do you mean I could stay where I am? You wouldn't come find me? Actually, I wouldn't be murdering my whole family, let's be real. That would not be a thing that would be happening. I would never do that. Alright, but that's it. Had a good stream. Good stories to share. I hope everybody had a good time. And, well, It's been fun. Yeah, the shopping cart one was really funny. But yeah, I'm glad everybody enjoyed the stories. I hope you all had a good time. And I hope the rest of your evening goes well also. And as always, I love spending time with you, my Hellions. It's called Red Ribbon. That's the name of the story. Red Ribbon by Minnie Shideen. But yeah, so you guys have a good night. I hope you enjoyed yourselves. Thanks all for stopping by. And until next time, bye!